Political Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. I got some late breaking news. The revolutionaries can use World War III alert. Trump versus China over Afghanistan. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. Y'all excuse me for my light, and I gotta go get me another light to go on our live as I come in. But this is very serious, y'all. Trump done decided to take us into some very dangerous times, trying to hog military bases from the Taliban, which they refuse to give up. They say they'd rather go to war. What is this about? Trump trying to target China. China not going to stand for it. Salute, family. This is going to... See, a lot of distractions all over the board, you see. Charlie Kirk, all that type of shit, that's to distract y'all from World War III still on the tape. I had to dip into Charlie. Then we're going to get back to World War III alert. Trump is reminding us they got the Epstein file and the small hats want chaos. And there's too many people on this damn planet. They want war.
This is WW3. We have Donald Trump ratcheting up his demand for this Bagram airfield that's in Afghanistan. He's now threatening the Taliban, the ones that took it over when we pulled out of the region in 2021. Now, that was done by Biden, and it was very fraudulent. When it happened, we left everything sitting there. All the equipment, weaponry, a lot of stuff was still sitting there. And they just let them have it all. It was very similar to what happened in Iraq, where when we left all this equipment.
You didn't let them have anything. The Taliban kicked your butt. You lost the war. 20 years you lost, and you got up out of there. Guess what? When you're losing and your enemy on your butt, you don't get to take billions of dollars worth of equipment. See, it's the arrogance. It's the arrogance. We just left it all. You got out of there in a hurry, but you lost. And you don't get nothing back.
Equipment sitting there, and ISIS came down out of Syria, the caliphate, and snatched it all up and had like $1 billion war chest for free. Well, now Trump is telegraphing that bad things are about to happen, saying that if you don't give us the base that we built, which they didn't build 100% of it, especially not the airfield.
They didn't build a base. The Soviets did. And it's a bad precedent because, see, Trump don't understand what he's doing. He don't understand what he's doing. He said, we built part of that base. No, the Soviets did. But say America did build that base. Let's just say Trump is telling the truth. America built that military base, and America is going to go take it back because we built the infrastructure. Say he's right. He's only setting Putin up to take more shit throughout the old Soviet empire. If the U.S. can say they taking over shit they built in other countries, well, then why can't Putin go take Poland? Take Romania, Go back into the Czech Republic. Go slap the hell out of Lithuania. Take all that stuff. They built all that infrastructure. See, Trump too stupid and to even understand what he's talking about.
But he's saying something's going to happen. That's pretty much it. He's not saying any other words outside of telegraphing that something's going to go down. Now, the leadership in Afghanistan is responding and saying, no, they need to stick to these agreements, the Doha agreement from years ago.
They didn't give you anything. They beat you, and all they didn't have no tanks, planes, helicopters, armored personnel carriers, rocket launchers, missiles. They didn't have all that stuff you left. Now imagine the Taliban fighting the U.S. soldiers this time, and they got all that equipment. I mean, Trump is really tripping, and he's putting all those soldiers' life in danger. No U.S. soldier who was in Afghanistan want to fight the Taliban when they have U.S. weapons. But Trump, there you go again, talking shit.
Where the United States respects everything that's going on and doesn't mess around with what is happening within Afghanistan. If they want to run military operations, they can't disrupt the sovereignty of Afghanistan. Trump saying that it's very clear why we want this base. It's within an hour of where China makes its nuclear weapons.
Now,
So
how stupid can Trump be? He actually said that. How stupid can Trump be? We want the base back because that base is an hour away from where China makes nuclear weapons. Boy, that can get you nuked talking like that. You want to target China's nuclear weaponry like they're Iran or somebody? That's what he said. Now the whole world is listening, and China's paying attention. And China spoke up, and they said, try it, and you're going to get nuked, America.
So that alone right there is a good enough reason for them to want into this base, to have access to it. And I mean, what are they going to do if they don't give it to them? They're going to start bombing them? It's very possible. Fight their way back in to their own airfield. I mean, it makes us look pretty idiotic.
Yeah, right.
All of it. But the world is a stage. And what I take from this is they like to telegraph things to come. And all of a sudden, we've got them putting out warnings of large crowds being attacked by Al Qaeda all of a sudden out of nowhere. And then also this is definitely different than the first Trump administration. He's busy on all these different war fronts. Venezuela, all that, everything's still yet to pop off there, all the way up through Mexico. They're hitting cartel boats, but this is war. All in all, it looks like they're bringing it right to our doorstep.
One cartel boat. They didn't see some drugs and stuff knocking out the competition. That man took no cartel. They in Venezuela making all kind of Russian weapons, Chinese weapons, aircraft, ships. Man, people ain't worried about Trump. You want to know why Venezuela ain't worried about Trump? Because of this story right here. You lost to the Taliban. Venezuela not worried about you, boy.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they announce some kind of operation or they do something here if they don't get their way.
They ain't gonna do shit.
Something big.
They ain't gonna do shit. They ain't gonna do shit. I'm saying the U.S. is not gonna go back into Afghanistan. It will go terribly wrong for them. The Taliban defeated them, and they barely had sandals on. Now, people think that's a joke. It's not a joke. Some of the Taliban warriors was defeating them. They didn't even have shoes on. Sometimes they had one soldier shoot some bullets, and then another soldier start shooting. He take a break. They passing the rifle. Man, come on, bro, stop it. Now they don't have to, but guess what? That's the past. Now they got advanced weaponry straight from the U.S. stocks. They got helicopters, all kind of armored personnel carriers. Man, come on, bro. Apache helicopters. Stop. The U.S. they some bad boys. They don't want to fight no goddamn Taliban with all that type of shit. That's just the truth.
It's going to come of it. If not, that's Trump's words and his threats right now. I'll leave a link. Join me for the live stream.
Threatening everybody and ain't did no motherfucking fighting. Trump done threatened the whole world. We have yet to see any boots on the ground. He played with Iran. Israel had to pay for it 12 days of devastation. But he going around here threatening everybody. Now, he talking about he going to take Bagram Air Base from the Taliban, you know. You know, China didn't find that too funny, though.
Base, that one of the biggest air bases in the world. We gave it to them for nothing. We're trying to get it back, by the way. Okay, that could be a little breaking news. We're trying to get it back because they need things from us. We want that base back. But one of the reasons we want the base is, as you know, it's an hour away from where China makes its nuclear weapons.
Might be a little breaking news that we want to take back Bagram Air Base. Now, for those who may not know about Bagram Air Bases, was the main logistics hub for our entire 20-year disaster of an Afghanistan war. Back on the roadshow edition today. You can see I'm not in my normal lair in Washington, D.C. area. Right now I'm coming to you from Houston, Texas, where I'll be on travel for a few days. But a lot of things keep happening, and I don't want to just leave you kind of hanging in the lurch without bringing you up to date on what's going on. So here we are. So Trump just spent 2 or 3 days in the UK on a state visit and, talked to King Charles and had all the pomp and circumstance and all this. And so you might think that the headlines were going to primarily be about maybe U.S.-UK relations, the special relationship, or maybe about the Russia-Ukraine war. And a lot of those things were discussed. But one of the bigger headlines to come out of this was, oddly enough, Afghanistan. I mean, Trump actually talked to, and he's been saying this before. I actually had an engagement with somebody who was in the Trump administration. I actually know somebody who is still in the Trump administration. Recently, at a relatively high level, said, "Oh, he says this stuff all the time. He doesn't mean it." But when you hear the statements he made, you got to go, "Really?"
We're going to leave Afghanistan, but we're going to leave it with strength and dignity. And we're going to keep Bagram, the big air base, that one of the biggest air bases in the world. We gave it to him for nothing. We're trying to get it back, by the way. Okay, that could be a little breaking news. We're trying to get it back because they need things from us. We want that base back. But one of the reasons we want the base is, as you know, it's an hour away from where China makes its nuclear weapons.
Might be a little breaking news that we want to take back Bagram Air Base. Now, for those who may not know, Bagram Air Base was the main logistics hub for our entire 20-year disaster of an Afghanistan war. And actually, on my last combat deployment there in 2010, 2011, that's where my headquarters was. So I'm very, very familiar with Bagram. And for those who may not be, let me just show you a map here. So this is, let me screen back a little so you can kind of see. This is the outline. This is Afghanistan here. Here's Kabul, the capital city. And then just a little bit north of there is the Bagram Air Base, very strategically located. You also see this is where the closest point to where China actually intersects, a small little sliver of land here. It's actually a border into Afghanistan, and then China goes on from there, and all this area back here. Now, when he says, they're 100 miles from where China makes nuclear weapons, maybe he's talking about some classified information, because I don't know where they make their nuclear weapons, but I guess you could draw a line 100 miles from there and just kind of say, well, it's in an arc, something like this. But listen, I mean, you got to say, wait, what are you talking about? That's where we want to go back there, because that's where China, I mean, think about what you're actually communicating to the Chinese. You're telling them, hey, we want to bring a military base back. We don't want the whole country of Afghanistan. We just want this place right here in case I want to go after your nuclear weapons. I mean, surely even Trump that's not lost on him what kind of an impact that's going to have. Now, first things first, wanting it and getting it are two very, very different things. In fact, the Taliban has, oddly enough, didn't just categorically reject it or any engagement with the United States. They did reject the idea that we would go back to Bagram Air Base, but they still said, hey, they reiterated their call to reclaim huge amounts of air base, but Taliban says U.S. must engage without seeking military presence. So Trump continued to say that in other comments that Taliban needs the United States, and they have some things that only we can give them. And I'm sure that's right, because there's a lot of needs in Afghanistan. I still have a friend that I knew during my time there who's lived there, and he confirms to me periodically that the living conditions are indeed terrible. Still lots of sanctions on the Taliban. And
the living conditions of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Who the hell do you think created those living conditions? I don't like that type of shit. Who the hell you think made Afghanistan like that? Afghanistan is resource rich. It's a reason why all empires done tried to go there. They didn't just go there for vacations. They didn't just go there for vacations. And that's disgusting, because that same thing they do with Venezuela, try to make y'all think that the leadership is the reason that it's poverty and things so bad. No, it's because there's resources of the country, and the imperialists want it. Like Trump demand. It's crazy that Trump is doing this. And that's why I don't like the Democrats. The Democrats not coming out and saying Trump a dictator because he's talking about taking Iceland, talking about taking Greenland, Canada, hogging Panama, the Panama Canal, talking about he finna take Bagram Air Base. Ain't no Democrats came out and say, no, we got to impeach him for that. Hell no, that's part of the military. See, Trump, I believe they didn't run a play on us. They want Trump in power so he can do the bad guy stuff. Even getting him locked up, that was all a play. even arresting him, that was all to play the Democrats in on. That made him look like he the outlaw Trump, fooled everybody. But this is to show you, he's talking about hogging Arab bases, going to war in Venezuela, taking Panama Canal, and ain't no Democrats said shit. They said nothing. And this is absolutely imperialism. Putin can't say he's finna take back some of the ex-Soviet nations. Boy, they be talking about World War III. What do you think going on in Ukraine right now? Putin has every right, by Trump's logic, to say, man, we're taking all these bridges, all these plants, we built this shit. These people ain't built none of this. By Trump's own logic, what he's saying, that's why he's a hypocrite. We want Bagram Air Base. We built it, which is a lie. The Soviets did, but U.S. put some of their infrastructure into it. They built onto what the Soviets already did. But let's just say Trump telling the truth. He built all of Bagram. Boy, you leaving Europe in a bad space because you're giving Putin the green light.
Their economic situation is just deplorable. So it's very, very difficult for really across the entire country and society. So I'm sure that the Taliban would like to get out of its isolation and be able to do more trade, et cetera. But the cost is not going to be giving us Bagram Air Base. And what would we even do there? I mean, just think about that. You want to reestablish our military presence at Bagram Air Base by your own voice because it's close to China, and not just close to China, but close to where they make nuclear weapons. I mean, that can't have any kind of positive impact. And then because there's no,
I really want to know how. I'm really interested. You got to give us more, Mr. President. How do you plan on taking Bagram from the Taliban? He think it's a movie. You can't just bomb your way back. You can drop some bombs. Yeah, you sure you can. If Pakistan allow that and India allow that, and that China is saying hell no. So I don't think you'll be flying all your planes around that territory. Iran, that's their border, Afghanistan. They might say hell no. Russia's still in the neighborhood. They might say hell no. But just say you could. You can't bomb it. You have to put boots on the ground. And I repeat, because you heard this here first. You would never see U.S. troops go and take nothing in Afghanistan from them people. And the reason why is because they have advanced U.S. weapons now. And the first time for the U.S. was hell. Now to fight the Taliban with some of the same weapons the U.S. got, come on, bro. Trump just talking out his ass, and the whole world knows.
There's no other mission up there. What is the military going to do? What is the Air Force going to do? Whether it's special forces or Army or any other people that would be there for sustainment, what would be their mission if we don't go after China? They would just be existing. I mean, just think about this, folks. I mean, this is. I'm sorry for those who may be big fans of President Trump. This is just weird. I mean, there's no kinder way to put it. To even think about going back into Bagram, much less to make a big deal of it and to say outward that maybe a little bit of breaking news, we're trying to get Bagram back. If the Taliban says no, then either you look completely powerless because they're not going to let you come. And then what are you going to do? You're going to take it by force?
No, they said you ain't getting 1 inch. They defeat you. They're not scared of you. They got your weapons. They won't war with you. Kick your butt in round 2 with advanced weapons. What you mean if they say no? They say not 1 inch. They won't give you an inch, much less the whole base. They say you can't get a millimeter. You can't get a piece of property, they say. Not even a piece, they say. They heard up and said that to Trump. Then China stepped in. So guess what? You fuck with the Taliban, they might have some Chinese weapons to kick ass too, like everybody else getting these days.
Of course, certainly not, because now then you set up a hostile situation where they have to defend themselves with no mission. But that's kind of where we are on this right now. And then let's take a look at the expected response from the Chinese side. As usual, they're not hyperbolic, they're not over the top, but they say this creating confrontation runs counter to people's aspirations. China says Trump's planning to retake Afghanistan air base. That's just not going to work. But I bet behind the scenes that they have far more concerns about it than that. Now, it's probable that China says, okay, this probably is Trump, just being Trump and just making these wild claims that are totally divorced from reality. I don't think they would actually worry about it unless we somehow actually got the base and started moving forces in there and, bombers, refuelers, possibly missiles, et cetera. Then I think you're going to have a lot more reaction from China. But probably up to this point, they're just going to say, okay, it's not helpful, but it's not going to happen anyway. And that's probably the case. That's probably how it's going to work out, that there's not going to be any going back to Bagram. But I'm telling you, you just got to ask the bigger question. why is this on Trump's mind? Why is he talking about this? I mean, this kind of harkens back to earlier in his administration that I'm going to take Panama Canal back, or we want to take Greenland, possibly by force.
Bro,
We might want to have Canada as our 51st state, and would not.
when you look at everything Trump said he's gonna do, take the Panama Canal, take Greenland, we gotta take Bagram. It's always because he's an imperialist, though. He says he's focusing on because China and Russia. China is at the ports in the Panama. China's doing business in Venezuela. He's always saying he's got to take something from other people. And what's so crazy about it, once he said it as the U.S. president, that makes it our national security. Obama done the same shit. See, this is what these presidents, now it's our national security. So he absolutely can go into Bagram, declare war. It'll be a hell of a war. He can do it. He trying. I've been telling this. He's scared to fight China, Russia. Trump is really trying to find somebody he can pick on, bro. He won't look tough. So now he done picked the Taliban. He don't give a damn they got weapons. He don't give a damn how many troops gonna die. He won't look tough. But now that he done said China got nuclear missiles near and all that type of shit, and we ain't nowhere near Afghanistan, but the base is near China, nuclear missiles, that's crazy he said that. Now he can say it's a national security threat. We must take that base.
Overtly rule out the use of military force. Just said, no, all options are on the table. And then here we got stuff going on in Venezuela, down in the Caribbean Sea. This is not good for America. It literally just diverts our strength all over the globe. It's not helpful. It's not in our American interest. It's things we don't need to do. Now, if you want to do something to try and interdict drugs and stuff coming in from Venezuela or Colombia, which is where far more of it comes in through, for Venezuela, it's more of a transit area, both in sea, water, and air, that there's ways to do that. You can interdict it at the border, et cetera, instead of talking about maybe invading and using military force on Venezuela. That's what he's talking about here in recent days and weeks. That we might use military force, and there's no plan. There's no attainable military objective to that. All you can do is get yourself sucked in to another unwinnable situation in our own hemisphere. Won't help the situation in terms of the drugs, because the drugs are going to come in as long as there's demand. No matter what, the drugs will come through. If you stop it up in one place, they'll simply move around it and they'll go someplace different. If you set up roadblocks here, I mean, it's the hemisphere. It's not like a choke point that you can cut off a choke point. The stuff is just, it'll go anywhere, in the air, on the sea, through land routes, et cetera. So that's not going to stop anything, but it could get you in a really big, dead end sucking situation where it just sucks in all your resources and everything else and gets into a lethal situation. I mean, just if you don't want to go much further, just look at the Houthis. We said we're going to stop the Houthis with relentless pressure and power and all this, and we're going to prevent them from interdicting in the Red Sea. And that was a fairly constrained small area, and we couldn't do it. We were spending $1 billion a month just throwing missile after missile and interceptor after interceptor. Didn't end the situation. It didn't stop the problem, and that was entirely predictable. But we still tried, and then we just stopped, which was the right thing to do. But the better thing to do was not to have started it. But you see, that's the problem with the administration, especially the president, is he doesn't think things through. He doesn't say, okay, what are the ramifications of doing this? This should be in a thought process before anything is even talked about. The first thing he should do is, it would be cool. Let's just say, for example, it would be cool if we can get the Bagram Air Base back. That might give us some strategic flexibility in the event China gets crazy on something. And then you start saying, first of all, just to yourself, what would be the reaction? What would be the chances the Taliban would agree to this? What would be the reactions from the Chinese side if we actually make good on it? Then you get your experts together, the people who've literally committed their whole lives to these different areas, and you get diversity of opinions, et cetera. And then you say, hey, based on all the things you guys have told me, either the cost is too high, the chance of success too low, or who knows, in a different case, maybe it's like, well, there's a risk, but there's also potential reward. So maybe I'll go down that path. That's how it's supposed to work, period, across the board. Anything that you're going to talk about doing as the president of the United States, it doesn't look like that is ever taking place. It doesn't look like he ever even asked the questions. Just these aspirations come out of his mouth, and then to hang with whatever happens and what the consequences are. And then some places like this Houthis thing, he throws it into action, which cost us $1 billion and embarrassment, because everybody in the world, despite what spin he put on it, and the Secretary of War, Hegseth, put on it, everybody else can see it was a complete and abysmal failure. That's what happened right there. And this would be, doing the Venezuela issue would be just as bad as that. There's just as much opportunity for failure, very little chance for any kind of positive thing. And then now this issue with the Bagram Air Base is even more crazy. There's just no path to doing anything of value or benefit to the United States that the cost wouldn't be out the top. And there's no way the Taliban is going to let us. Why would they do that? Don't you remember what happened during, I mean, first of all, during, I think it was the 1832 British, when they tried to conquer the Taliban, even though they were technologically vastly superior, it was disaster. They ended up leaving in great bloodshed and humiliation. Then the Soviets tried it in the 80s, 10 years of disaster. And then we were the latest power to show that you're not going to quell them, even though they're backwards and all this kind of stuff technologically. They're also long suffering, and they hate invaders. They hate foreigners. Now, why do you think all of that history would suddenly be different for the Bagram Air Base? And as though the Afghanistan, bordering state with China, is going to risk the ire of China. China can help them, but they can also hurt them. So China would definitely not be passive if this started going down and getting any traction, and they would certainly take action against the Taliban. And I don't know. I haven't paid attention here lately. I don't know if they're doing anything positive or not. If they have trade, I'm not sure what the current state of affairs is. But I can assure you, whatever it is, it could turn very much dark and worse if Taliban should do that. But they're aware of that, and they're not going to have a problem with their neighbor just to please somebody from 10,000 miles away on the other side of the earth that they gain hardly anything from. That's where we started. So that was the big headline coming out of Trump's European trip to UK. But there were others. And let's take a look at what that was, because turns out, probably using this same, I was going to say mentality, but absence of mentality, absence of thought process of think things through, Trump says that basically Putin is going to be forced, and he have no choice but to give in to what Trump wants.
Very simply, if the price of oil comes down, Putin's going to drop out. He's going to have no choice. He's going to drop out of that war. And when I found out that the European nations were buying oil from Russia, and as you know, I'm very close to India. I'm very close to the Prime Minister of India. I spoke to him the other day, wished him a happy birthday. We have a very good relationship.
People buying all kind of stuff from Russia too. This man guilty right here. They buying all kind of shit from Russia, especially uranium. They get all, oh Lord have mercy, they getting all that uranium from the Russians. He said the Europeans to embarrass the British guy next to him. Yeah, the British is buying all the gas and all. They still gotta keep their lights on there. They all die in the winter. You know what I'm saying? They would all freeze to death in the heat. They die heat strokes. But Trump don't care. This is to shake the Europeans down even more and make them pay for the U.S. liquefied gas, that shit 5 times more. He don't care. But threatening, Putin just laugh at him every time he say it because he knows it's a shakedown.
People had a beautiful statement too. We have, but I said, I sanctioned them. China is paying a very large tariff right now to the United States.
That's a lot.
But I'm willing to do other things, but not when the people that I'm fighting for are buying oil from Russia. If the oil price comes down, very simply, Russia will settle. And the oil price is way down. We got it way down. We're drilling and we produce more oil than anybody else in the world. We're doing a lot. But I was disappointed to see that. And the Prime Minister was disappointed to see that. And it wasn't him. It was other countries. And you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't. That's not other countries. That's not playing fair with the United States. And we can't have that.
So it would be no choice. No choice. Putin would have to just give up the war. I mean, that is, there's so much troubling on many levels. There's about 3 things I want to point out from that soundbite right there. Some of the things that he said. We'll start with that one. That Putin will have no choice.
That's so humiliating for NATO and the U.S. And if I was Zelensky, I'd just beg Putin, forgive me, please. Take my right hand and my leg. Take my eye and left ear. Please, it's over. Because the U.S. best plan they can come up with is to drop the oil prices. No more sending their advanced weapons. No more Patriot system. What happened to F-16s? But we don't hear about that shit no more. F-16s is going to win. No more of that. They tired of that hustle. That's an old con. They just stole our money. Now the best they come with. You heard Trump. This is last. This if we bring oil prices down, man, bro, you trying to get the U.S. to make more money. Yep, it's about more money for them. But they never gonna be able to defeat no Russians. But people should be saying, is that the best y'all can come up with? Tuh.
I mean, I worry that he may believe that he may actually think Putin will have no choice. That kind of simplistic thought that all I have to do is bring either the price of oil down or limit how much money he can make. And then that pressure point will cause him to give in to do whatever it is that Trump wants. And I'm just like, do you not know anything about Russian history? Have you never seen what the Russians did against Napoleon? Although sometimes you claim that, and actually you state that. You say that Russia has a history of these kind of things. So you do apparently know, or you see what kind of extraordinary suffering they were willing to do in World War I before the Russian Revolution started. 5 million dead before that. It took that kind of casualties from mismanagement from the Tsar and their military leaders, et cetera, on top of an economic collapse, et cetera, and a bunch of other stuff. It certainly wasn't that simple. But the point being that it took 5 million Russians dead to finally push them over the edge to where they rose up. And then, of course, during World War II, it was more like 20, depending on who you want to talk to, 25, 30 million on top of that. So, and they not only didn't revolt, that they just knuckled down and went in harder. This is an existential threat for Russia. And there is no financial pressure point on Russia that's going to cause them to just give away, because that's why Russia keeps saying over and over, it's the core causes. It's the root causes of all this, which led to the war in the first place, that must be acknowledged. It's not just territory. It's not just where the line of contact is and where the lines are going to be on the map afterwards. Those are secondary things. The primary thing is that there's not going to be a hostile force on their border that's friendly to NATO, that is hostile categorically to Russia, i.e., the Zelensky regime and a lot of what the Russians consider neo-fascists, et cetera. Ukraine has a different word. Doesn't matter. The Russians consider that hostile, and they will not stop and have a negotiated settlement on terms that no matter what the price of oil will be, they will suffer a lot. You can't even calculate how much it would be before they're going to just give up on that. There's no rational path. The only way that Russia could be forced into a settlement against its wishes is if they didn't have the physical capacity to continue to the war. That's the only way. And you see, if you're confused still on that, and you think, well, then let's put more pressure on them. Let's just keep going a little bit further until finally we find that pressure point. Look at Zelensky. Zelensky has all the powers against him. He has all the fundamentals against him, just irrevocably. And yet, has he given up? His country is just bombarded from one border to the next, all north to south, east to west, all the way up to the European borders. And they just keep getting pummeled night after night with these long-range forces. They lose thousands of troops every month. They continue to methodically be whittled down. They have not had any kind of an offensive success since the very short-term Kursk offensive, which was almost suicidal and was for about 70,000 of their troops, gained nothing in the end. And they, in fact, lost more of another territory in Sumy, which Russia still has a toehold in to this day. So that's everything has been going against Ukraine all the way since about November 2022, or November 2023, we'll say. And so yet their economy is fine. I think I showed you yesterday that Zelensky has said, look, I need 120 billion to keep the war going next year. And that's just to keep the state alive. He said, we can probably muster about 60 of that on our own. So I need another 60 billion. So far, the most anybody's talking about is 2.3 billion that they'll give him. So he's saying, I don't even know how we're going to exist. And yet, he still hasn't given up. He still is not willing to negotiate. Now, what possible ration could anybody point to that Russia, with Putin, who's been in power for 20 years, with all of the history Russia has, with all of their natural resources, with the vast country that they have, that Russia could come up with a pain point that would cause them to surrender when the Ukraine side won't, when they have all these pressures? You see what I'm saying? If you know anything about Russia, you know there's not going to be a pain point. You can wish there was, you can hope there is, but there's not, and there's no rational reason to think there is. And so to place policy and to place your future success on the hope that something irrational happens, you're setting yourself up for domestic disaster. Our side is not going to come out looking good on this. You've seen John Mearsheimer on our show more than once say it's going to be decided on the battlefield because we abjectly refuse to have it settled on the negotiating table where we could at least come out with something beneficial and positive for our side. We reject all that. So the only thing left to Russia is an eventual military success. I mean, that's just what we're setting ourselves up for. And then we'll have to deal with the fallout of that, of everybody in the world knowing that we, this most powerful military alliance in the history of mankind, couldn't even keep little Ukraine from falling to Russia. That's just where we're going here, folks. The other thing here said, I thought that was interesting. He said, Trump said, I just found out that Russia is selling oil to some European countries. I just found that out. And I was going, wait, I mean, does he think that nobody knows what's going on and that he can say that and nobody's going to do what we just did and said, what are you talking about? Everybody knows it. It's all on the topic of conversation all the time. It's in all the headlines. People discuss it. Does he really not know? I don't know, but that's troublesome that he says, I just found out. And then Starmer actually, because he's standing right next to him when he's talking about that, they look over at Starmer and catch out this pretty tough question from his own media.
Prime Minister, President Trump has said he's ready to impose major sanctions on Russia if NATO countries stop purchasing Russian oil. He's got a point, hasn't he?
I think it is a challenge to Europe. There are a number of European countries which are too reliant on energy from Russia. The UK actually...
Trump really trapped them. They're not going to stop buying Russian gas and energy. They can't. They would all die. Winter's coming. Are you crazy? So Trump is telling them, stop telling me to put more sanctions on Putin if you're going to keep buying oil and gas from him. See, they're really trapped.
Obviously is almost got nothing at all, but we do need to bear down and work with our European counterparts here. There are one or two countries, I think, that do need to look again at the question of energy. There's no one silver bullet.
One or two.
We do have to have a wider suite of sanctions, which we've put in place. We've said we stand with Ukraine from the start to finish, and that means we must continue.
Yeah, that's not a good answer. I mean, you can see him kind of like going, well, I mean, I guess that we're not buying that much oil from Russia. We've got a zero, and I guess there's some. You see, I mean, you're called out there on the carpet, and everybody in Trump's just kind of looking at him, going, "What you going to say?" So it wasn't a good look for Starmer, but it was pretty embarrassing for him. And as a matter of fact, on Air Force One on the way back, Trump was asked about how embarrassed Starmer was.
Did the Prime Minister talk to you about Ukraine? He indicated he did. What were his arguments for what you should do?
He was really a little bit embarrassed, and he's rightfully, that I caught Europe, NATO countries, EU countries, you can call it either way because they're very similar, but that I caught them buying oil from Russia. And he said, that's not good. I mean, I appreciate it when he said that. He said, that's not good. Now, how about that? We're supposed to do all this stuff, and they're buying oil from Russia.
So we're 3.5 years into this war. Now, 8 months into the Trump administration, and you caught Europe buying oil from Russia?
He knew they were doing that.
I mean, that makes it sound like he didn't know. I mean, does he not know how embarrassing that is? Forget about Starmer being embarrassed. He was. But Trump is not embarrassed. At least Starmer recognized the duplicity with what he's talking about, that we're putting sanctions on Russia. And he really quickly pivoted over to that. Well, we're going to put sanctions on Russia, and we're looking at a multitude of things that we need to get done, et cetera. But we told Ukraine we'll be with them from the start to the finish. And so, yeah, the ugly finish, and meaning that, like, as they go down the drain, you're hooking your country and your reputation to it.
Revolutionary salute to our brother Randy Thomas for the donation to the war chest. Revolutionary salute. I appreciate the love. Soldier salute to you.
And foolishly going down with the ship. Why would you do that? Number one. But I guess they just have this delusion that some magic thing will happen and it won't end up that way because, well, it never has. since World War II, we've always figured something out. We've always, talked our way out of stuff, and there was never actually a cost anything. There was some embarrassment here and there and some lack of success on what we wanted. But I mean, hey, we're the West, and we kind of stuck together, and there was no actual cost. But now I think that we're in a situation where, with President Trump talking about things that have no chance of success, that he's going to get the Taliban to give us an air base, that China's going to sit passively by if we come with the avowed statement that it's close to their nuclear weapons production facilities, that we're going to put maybe sanctions on Russia that are harsh, and that he'll have no choice but to. I mean, when our adversaries see this, when other countries around the world see this, they think, what is wrong with you people, man? I mean, you talk about things that push people back in the direction of the East, and that this growing conglomeration of BRICS and the SCO and all kinds of things where they're coming up with new economic forums of the Chinese Belt and Road, that all kinds of bilateral, multilateral events, etc. And they see that no one on the other side is putting pressure on anybody to do anything, but they are going, have you seen that? And they have. They have seen that, and they continue to see that. When it comes to what is going to be good for our country, folks, I'm just telling you, the days of running roughshod like we're the Wild West cowboy, and that we can do whatever we want and nobody else has the power to do anything, those days are over. They're past tense, probably never to be seen again, certainly not in our lifetimes. If anything, the power dynamic is continuing to shift to the east, and now it's doing so faster because of our own actions. So we are facilitating and accelerating our own cost and our own demise if it goes that far. Because Russia is not going to be forced into anything. Bagram is not coming back to us, and China will not stand by passively when we try to do that. And then this whole thing about putting more sanctions on Russia, come on, we tried this for 3.5 years, more than 3.5 years now. And it always failed. And because of the construction that Russia retooled its economy to prevent the pressure it has from the West to do sanctions stuff, they've made themselves, if not sanctions proof, greatly sanctions resistant. So you don't even have the levers to play anymore, because the things you would do, now Russia has other outlets with other partners in the rest of the world, and they continue to, if you wanted to isolate Russia, that's obviously a thing of the past as well. That's not even, I'm talking even recently, because Putin was isolated earlier in this war to a certain degree, but now that's moved in the opposite direction. Now then you see him being feted in places all the time. He's had international visits. He's going to places, other countries are coming to them. They're expanding just, culturally, they're expanding economically, etc. And Russia is playing the long game. Russia is playing the long game militarily and economically. And they see that we have the cards, and there's no reason to take a lot of risk. I suspect that if things started getting tight, that they would be willing to take risks, because they certainly have levers to do that. But so far, they and the Chinese, of course, are famous for their long suffering and their long view. They always look to the long term, not to the short term, or not even to the midterm. But they always have a long-term vision in mind, and they're playing it out like that right now. And I saw an article, I guess it was yesterday when I was on the plane on the way to Houston, that China is basically saying, hey, we're just going to sit back and watch the U.S. just destroy itself. We're not going to get involved. We don't have to take any action. We don't need to do anything to accelerate this. You guys are going to do it on your own. And I think that there's some plausibility to that. I think they may end up doing that, because they see what is the classic thing they say? If you see your enemy struggling, don't help him out. Just let him continue to founder. Don't do something dumb that's going to get him out of the trouble. And I think that's what China's play is right now. And it's not going to be good for us. And kind of toward that end, and again, kind of put a little bow on this. One last question that Trump was asked out aboard Air Force One after the meeting. He was asked about, how much longer are you going to give President Putin before this ceasefire? Which it's an odd question, because that's been taken off the table a long time ago. Russia's not going to do a ceasefire. I've been telling you that from the first time it came up, really in December, when that idea came up. There's no way they were going to do that, and certainly they haven't. But now then, Trump was asked that question, and I think he infers something in his answer. See if you can catch it.
It's been a month since you're meeting with President Putin. Is it time for a ceasefire to come?
Doesn't feel like it, but at the right time, if I have to do it, it'll be harsh.
When he says I'll do it, I think that he means that if there's no ceasefire at the right time, then I'll have all of these huge sanctions and secondary tariffs on all these different countries, and it'll be harsh or whatever. He still has this. I suspect it's not a fantasy that he thinks it'll work. If he had that fantasy, I think he would have already done it. If he thought that putting in those sanctions on Russia and secondary tariffs on people who buy their oil, if he thought that would work, I think he would have already done it. Other than India, and I think that there's multiple things going on with that one country as well. But if he thought a broader application would work, I think he would have already done it. I think, though, what he means when he says this is that I'm just going to say this stuff, and so people will think I'm going to do something later, and then that threat that maybe I'll act will cause them to actually do what I want them to do. And I'm just telling you, there's zero chance of that. Not unlikely, not improbable, but zero. They're not going to do it because they know that we don't have the stick. They know that we don't have the resources to compel compliance on anything, and that if we did those things, it would be painful to them, especially where you're talking about Russia, China, India, and Brazil. It would cause them some pain, which they wouldn't like, and they don't want to go down that path. But they are also playing for the medium and long term, all those countries, and they know that we can't sustain it. That's why when Trump had this 145% tariff on China earlier on, they just said, you can't sustain that. And he was right. And Trump went off of it shortly, not long after it went in. It went down to 30%. I think they're still trying to negotiate some things even as we speak here. But I think they know that if there's a pressure point to have somewhere, it's our pressure point. It's that if we take this action, it will be us who is hurt in the medium and long term and not them. And I think that they're willing to play this out. All this stuff is not good for the United States, and it's something we need to change. But all I can do is tell you what he's saying and what the realities are here. Obviously, we have no influence over anything in the Trump administration. I don't know that anybody does. I don't know that cabinet secretaries do, frankly. But that's where we are today, folks. That's all we got for you today on this special edition from Houston, Texas.
Wow, people better wake up and pay attention right now. What happened on September 17th was in many ways earth-shattering. It might have seemed small to the dumb folks on cable news, but it was anything but. Because on September 17th, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell stepped up to the podium in Washington, D.C., delivered a decision that basically reverberated far beyond the marble halls of the Fed building. The media has no clue about what this really means for Americans or America itself, and the clash right now between the BRICS nations and the U.S.-led, U.S.-backed dollar order. It's effectively a new monetary system that has been unleashed. So the Obama-Biden era basically is now officially dead.
This also gives the internet one last chance to talk about our bromance.
The media didn't cover it because there's just too many moving pieces, and it would take these clowns far too much time trying to connect all of the dots to properly explain what happened. But we're going to try to do it for you here today. But first, we know with certainty that last Wednesday was the final day of the dollar's 2008 to 2025 era of deep state manipulation. Again, this Obama manipulation era is coming to an end, and I'll explain it. For 5 years, the Fed choked American businesses and individuals and enriched the elites. We saw it happen. Well, this ends right now. What few people fail to realize is just how historic this period we're embarking upon is right now. I mean, nothing in the past 80 years comes close. And it brings with it a huge opportunity in the gold sector that we've not seen since 1971, in my opinion. I mean, needless to say, I've been waiting for this one for a very long time. So Let's go through all of this in detail right now. This rate cut was the death knell for a 3-decade reign for the US dollar's unchallenged tenure as the world's de facto reserve currency from 1993 to 2025, after the fall of the Soviet Union. Hyper-globalization enriched a cabal of elites, entrenched a shadowy deep state, and supercharged the Chinese Communist Party's export machine, while all the while bleeding America's heartland totally dry. You know, I honestly feel like that's the best summary of what just happened. So if you need to rewind the video, do it right now and hit replay. Replay what I just said there. You see, Trump has just managed to pull off a seismic shift event because MAGA has entered the halls of the deep state's Federal Reserve. The newest governor, Stephen Moran, Trump's handpicked economic warrior, and this means the beginning of the abolishing of the Fed is here. Think of this as like killing the Fed from inside, like the rot. Similar to what he's doing at the Department of Education right now, destroying it from the inside out. Now, Trump's vision is for a Fed that's no longer insulated in an ivory tower sort of independence, but instead it'll be fused at the hip with the Treasury Department, because Moscow and Beijing are moving at lightning speed right now to build a gold-backed counterbalance to the US dollar. So the Fed and the Treasury have been totally out of step. So a little history here. From 1993, when the Clinton era NAFTA and World Trade Organization deals locked in dollar hegemony, the reserve asset was hoarded by central banks worldwide. It peaked at 71% of global allocations. And of course, it exacted a brutal toll on ordinary Americans when all of these other countries were hoarding the US dollar. Factories shut down in the Rust Belt, wages stagnated, cheap Chinese imports flooded store shelves, trillions in trade deficits funneled all the wealth upward to Wall Street elites. And the deep state apparatus that thrived on all these endless wars and surveillance states, they exploded. So businesses left America, went to Mexico, and the Chinese Communist Party gorged itself on the spoils. And like Trump says, who can blame them? It was like a massive, nearly free buffet of crab legs, steak, and they got fat.
Get in my belly!
Then a perpetual trade surplus ballooned to $400 billion. And man, did it fund China's rise. We basically paid for China's military colossus that they have now, from hypersonic missiles to South China Sea fortresses. America's middle class footed the bill for that. Their productivity gains siphoned off to fund a rival's ascent, you could call it. So Trump smells the danger that's floating around right now in this rate cut, and Moran's appointment was the first shot of the currency war with China and Russia. Make no mistake about it. You thought tariffs were the start of this war? So to fund the colossal golden era that Trump envisions, a $1 trillion blitz on AI supremacy, Mars colonization, building a moon base they just announced, and hypersonic missile defenses and a new golden dome over the United States, the government needs borrowing costs slashed down to the bone. Without low rates, the U.S. risks forfeiting this AI race to Huawei's quantum leaps, to Baidu's data empires all across China. They're already outpacing OpenAI, ChatGPT and patent filings by 40% in 2025. So basically, they are crushing us right now. And the space race, China's Tiangong station orbits unchallenged.
The Chinese space program recently completed a major milestone with their Tiangong space station.
Russia is planning moon lunar bases right now. The U.S. is playing catch up. And geopolitically, a cash-strapped America watches helplessly as the CCP is entering Latin and Central America. $200 billion new Belt and Road loans into Latin America. They grabbed Nicaragua's ports, Venezuela's oil. And this U.S. dollar collapse is inevitable. It's imminent, and it's unavoidable, by the way, as we've been warning you. President Trump has been calling for a weaker dollar now for months.
Why has the dollar fallen so much? And are you concerned about that?
Well, I'm a person that likes the strong dollar, but a weak dollar makes you a hell of a lot more money. Now, it doesn't sound good, but you make a hell of a lot more money with a weaker dollar. Not a weak dollar, but a weaker dollar than you do with a strong dollar.
China has been dumping its U.S. Treasury holdings by $76 billion in the last quarter alone. That's the sharpest drop since 2009. Beijing is not bluffing here. It's reallocating to yuan swaps with 40-plus BRICS nations right now, where 90% of the Sino-Russian trade bypasses the US dollar. No more US dollars for China and Russia. They've pivoted. Russia pivoted to gold-backed rubles. And their summit a few weeks ago, China invited 30 nations to blueprint a gold yuan trade architecture, explicitly framing de-dollarization as a multipolar justice. We're done with your US dollar. No more unipolar order. We want multipolar justice. So the dominoes are falling. And if you look at IMF data today, the global dollar reserves dipped to 58% just in this quarter, second quarter of 2025. That's the lowest since 2000. Meanwhile, Beijing is hoarding 2,300 tons of gold while repatriating bars from London vaults right now. Russia's vaults are filled 2,300 tons of gold as well. So if the dollar isn't weakened, as Moran insists, the U.S. can't beat China. Trump's golden era demands $2 trillion in annual deficits for AI, lunar bases, Mars bases, the Panama Canal fortifications he wants to build against China's encroachment, all into Latin America. The alternative is capitulation, like we're just done. We're just going to hand over the keys to China and Russia and kind of put our tail between our legs, like Britain did a number of years ago, a shell of its former self. So what are we going to do? Without low rates and a competitive dollar, China surges. In other words, both Xi Jinping and Trump are seeing the same thing, a weak US dollar. Trump wants it to be a managed decline. Xi Jinping wants total chaos. Right now, with a national debt passing 37 trillion, interest payments gobbling 14% of the budget, these high rates are just a noose around Uncle Sam's neck right now. So guys, we are entering the global decline of the US dollar, the US Bretton Woods US dollar system. And mark my words, it started on September 17th, 2025, and it will go on for years to come. Even Jerome Powell said he doesn't know what the economy is going to look like in the next 3 years. He has no idea. I have an idea. It's going to be bumpy. So that's the news update part of today.
They were trying to destroy our dollar. They were going to say, you know, they wanted to create a new currency. They probably wanted to use the yuan, China.
Realize capitalism didn't change China. China changed capitalism.
I think that's breaking up very rapidly. We said that if they're going to go and do anything to undermine the dollar, that includes China.
A lot of time, most of the people are up here now don't remember. You know, I was very young, obviously, at the end of the Cold War, but it's been about 30 years. In our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar.
When a currency starts to settle oil, replace dollars in trade, and builds its own payment highways, that's not just economics, that's power. And that's what China's yuan is doing right now. Less than 15 years ago, almost none of China's cross-border trade was in its own currency. Today, more than half is. Saudi Arabia, Russia, Brazil, all use yuan for trading with China. And in Europe, Hungary just issued the largest ever sovereign yuan bond. Now, this isn't a marginal shift. It's the beginning of a parallel financial order, one where Beijing is installing the plumbing infrastructure, setting up those swap lines, clearing banks, digital currency networks, and the yuan is flowing through it. History tells us that this process should take decades. For the United States, it took more than 50 years of 2 world wars, gold shipments from Europe, and the Marshall Plan. For China, that shift is starting in less than 20. 15 years ago, less than 1% of China's cross-border transactions were settled in yuan. Today, more than half are. In 2019, just 14% of China's own trade was conducted in its own currency. By 2025, this year, that figure has climbed above 30%. At the same time, Chinese banks have shifted billions of dollars worth of overseas loans out of dollars and into the yuan. It tripled the stock of yuan-denominated debt to more than $300 billion. This rise has accelerated after the United States sanctions on Russia. But under President Trump, the US dollar has been hit even further thanks to his erratic trade policy, his recent tax cuts bill, which will increase the United States government deficit by further trillions, and his constant threats to the independence of America's Federal Reserve. He's recently gone to ask the Supreme Court if he can fire the Fed Governor Lisa Cook after an appeals court rejected his decision to do so. No president has fired a sitting Fed governor in the agency's 112-year history. The closely watched Bank of America Fund Manager Survey just saw a sharp jump in the number of money managers, 26%, from last month, 10%, saying that they're worried about the Fed's independence. This affects the dollar's rate, as it means that buyers think they cannot trust the Fed to make independent policies for the economy, which will safeguard the value of the US dollar. Investors are signaling that mistrust because they're pouring into gold, which has just hit record highs. It's a classic hedge against dollar weakness. The dollar's fallen by over 7% since January this year, and it's had its worst start to any year since 1973. Foreign investors are piling into the yuan as governments around the world look for dollar alternatives. For countries that rely heavily on dollar liquidity or fear Washington's sanctions, the appeal of diversifying currencies has rarely been stronger. By contrast, China's yuan has reached its highest level since Donald Trump was re-elected in November 2024. One of the clearest examples of this shift is Russia. After Western sanctions froze nearly $300 billion of its dollar and euro reserves in 2022, which were sitting in Western banks, Moscow accelerated the pivot. Today, more than 90% of trade between Russia and China is settled in yuan and rubles, compared with less than 30% before the Ukrainian war. Russian companies are issuing yuan-denominated bonds, and Russian banks are running yuan liquidity desks. And the Moscow exchange now clears more yuan than dollars. What began as a desperate hedge for Russia has become a financial lifeline. And survival trades have a way of turning into long-term habits. Despite Donald Trump's promise of uniting Russia and China, it's not going to happen. The Russians are not that stupid. Saudi Arabia tells a similar story. Since 2023, Riyadh has allowed Chinese oil refiners to pay for a part of their crude imports in yuan. The volumes are still modest compared with the entrenched petrodollar system, but the symbolism is powerful. Oil is the backbone of global trade, and China is the world's largest crude importer. The Saudis would have done a lot more if they were not so afraid of the American response on whose military security they depend on. However, even a partial settlement in yuan chips away at the dollar's most guarded stronghold, energy markets. And if energy starts slipping out of the dollar's grip, history tells us everything else follows. Brazil's also shifted. In 2023, its central bank signed a yuan clearing agreement and began settling soybean and iron ore shipments directly in the yuan. For Brazilian exporters, the advantage is clear. It's less dollar risk and much faster settlement. For China, it deepens ties with one of the world's largest commodity suppliers. What began as a technical adjustment is now a financial bridge. It's linking Latin America's biggest economy much more tightly to Beijing. And remember, these countries are all major trading partners of China. The yuan they receive can be recycled directly into imports from China, avoiding the costs of the exchange of switching into and out of dollars. The earlier system basically created inefficiencies for them. Now, the yuan is allowing for a much cleaner, cheaper, and politically safer trade. For governments wary of Washington sanctions or simply tired of dollar's volatility, it is a compelling alternative. Now, I have done a whole series of videos on de-dollarization, so do check out that playlist, which actually looks at de-dollarization and what the dollar itself is doing, which is creating that. This is all about yuan. Now, all of this has not happened by chance. Beijing is setting up the structure of a new order. It's adopting a deliberate policy to internationalize the yuan as a strategy to insulate its own exporters from swings in the dollar, to blunt the threat of any future US financial sanctions, and to create that parallel financial order that is less dependent on Washington.
We have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction.
And it doesn't take Nostradamus to see that the US is preparing to isolate China as soon as it can. Now, Beijing has set up currency swap lines worth 4.5 trillion yuan, which is around 630 billion US dollars. China's building a safety net for dozens of central banks around the world, one that rivals the reach of the IMF itself. And this helps to globalize the yuan, especially in times of crisis. When countries' central banks need help, China will step in. The yuan currently accounts for only 4% of international payments, compared with 50% for the greenback. Similarly, 2% of global reserves are held in yuan, against nearly 55% in dollars. A lot of this is due to China's tight controls on money flowing in and out of the country, which has delayed the wider use of the yuan. But the direction is very clear. And when you compare this against the history of the dollar's own rise, you get to understand that yuan's progress to internationalization is much faster than many realize. Let's dive in deeper to understand briefly how and when the US dollar became the prime currency of the world, in which most of us have grown up under, and how China's yuan is taking over step by step. And it's a lot faster than you think. The United States overtook Britain as the world's largest economy by industrial output in the 1890s. After World War I, the US started to accumulate gold and became a major creditor to the world. The dollar's role in the international finance started growing quite rapidly between the 1920s and 1930s. But it took more than 5 decades, 2 world wars, UK government to run out of money, rebuilding Europe via the Marshall Plan, the transfer of Europe's gold to New York, and the creation of the Bretton Woods in 1944, before the dollar truly displaced sterling as the global reserve currency. In the Bretton Woods Conference, the dollar was formally established as that central currency of the international monetary system. Other currencies were now pegged to the dollar, which in turn was at that time pegged to gold. That institutionalized and accelerated the dollar's dominance. That's about 5 to 6 decades, roughly 50 to 60 years before a clear dominance was established. But that world order is now breaking down. The dollar, which reached a high of 78% of foreign exchange reserves in 2001, the zenith point of its unipolar movement, has been coming down. Currently, it stands around 55%. That history matters because it shows that the economic size of a country alone does not instantly translate into financial dominance. China today is in a comparable position. It has nearly 20% of the world's GDP and around 30% of global trade. To become the world's reserve currency takes infrastructure, credibility, trust, and desire by the country. We only need to think about which country is gaining on those 4 factors and which country is losing out to see where China's going. By that standard, China's yuan is advancing at an unusual speed. And to see why, we need to look both at what Beijing has built and what weaknesses in the dollar it's exploiting today. The timing's favorable for China. In Washington, fiscal deficits have ballooned to over 7% of GDP. Remember the UK? Federal debt has crossed $37 trillion. And political battles routinely threaten government shutdown. We're currently in the midst of another potential shutdown as the political parties fight to get what they want approved. This is now a strategic move for China, and they think the time is right to make this move. China's leaders think a globally accepted yuan can help reshape the global monetary order and safeguard the country's own financial system. This makes it a matter of national security for them. It also ties foreign governments, firms, and investors much more closely to China. The strategy of financial tying, of course, works. We know that the Americans are the old masters at it. For example, Hungary is the most pro-Chinese country in Europe. Both countries have lots of financial and business ties together. More details on that later. In June 2025, China's central bank governor Pan Gongsheng declared that the global system was becoming multipolar. The dollar, he argued, would face competition from the yuan and others. The vision is not to topple the dollar, but to erode its singular dominance. Even if the yuan's share of reserves rose only to 10 or 15%, it would transform the balance of global finance. Now is a great time to do it, as that waning trust in the dollar and a supportive macroeconomic environment in China is helping to boost its efforts. For example, interest rates cuts have pushed borrowing costs in the offshore market to below 2%. This is the lowest level since 2013. And this has led to foreign and big Chinese corporates to issue a record amount of what are called dim sum yuan bonds this year. Traditionally, they would have raised dollar bonds. Now, dim sum bonds are yuan-denominated bonds which are issued in Hong Kong that foreign investors can buy. But it's not just offshore borrowing. Inside China, there has been what is a surge in what are called panda bonds. These are yuan-denominated bonds which are issued by foreign governments and companies directly into China's own domestic market. Hungary, for example, has issued a 5 billion yuan panda bond this summer. It's the largest sovereign issuance to date, worth around $700 million US. The move was not just financial. It highlights how market access can reinforce political alignment. Hungary is already one of Beijing's closest partners in Europe, and it's vetoed EU criticism of China on multiple occasions. By tapping into China's bond market, it's further deepened those ties. Meanwhile, building on that trade shift, Russian energy companies are now also preparing their first panda bonds. And the Pakistani government is to issue one for $250 million as well. It's the first for the country. Countries like Kenya and Brazil are also weighing similar options. Together, all these offerings show that governments and firms are increasingly willing to bypass dollar markets and raise funding in China itself, a sign that yuan assets are becoming part of the global financial toolkit. China first attempted the yuan internationalization in 2009 after that global financial crisis. I remember that Lehman Brothers in 2008 was the reason why that financial crisis came about, and I was actually working at Lehman at the time. Now, one of the biggest issues that China faced at the time was that some of the capital controls were loosened, and the yuan settlement in trade rose quickly. But that experiment ended abruptly in 2015 after a stock market crash in China and a surprise devaluation sent money fleeing offshore, as it does when you have these open capital markets. China responded at that time by reimposing tight controls. In retrospect, that setback also gave China time. Pushing too hard too early might have provoked a sharper Western backlash. At a moment when China's economy was still maturing and its financial system was not yet ready to compete with the dollar. By slowing down, Beijing avoided making its currency a geopolitical target before it was economically strong enough to sustain the pressure. And the lesson was clear. Internationalization had to come only after China had built the depth, the liquidity, and the trade weight to support it. This time, officials are proceeding much more carefully. The strategy is to expand usage gradually, build the infrastructure for the yuan transactions, and ensure that foreigners have incentives to hold yuan assets. The push started on the domestic front through trade and payments. Over 30% of China's trade in goods and services is now done in its own currency, compared with that 14% in 2019. It settles more than 50% of its total cross-border receipts, including financial flows, in the yuan. And this is up from less than 1% in 2010. And globally, the yuan's share of international payments has doubled since 2022, reaching around 4% of the total. While this still lags far behind the dollar's 50% share, the rate of growth is striking. And we should also keep in mind, since a lot of the Chinese yuan trade is done outside the SWIFT system, this may actually be undercounting the percentage it actually has. In a push to further increase the circulation of the yuan, in May 2025, Chinese regulators told big banks that up to 40% of their trade facilitation lending should now be in yuan. Chinese banks have also shifted their overseas lending dramatically. Now, before 2022, only 15% of Chinese overseas loans were in the yuan. After Western sanctions cut Moscow out of the dollar system, new lending is now almost entirely denominated in the yuan. By 2025, more than 40% of outstanding overseas loans worth around $300 billion are yuan-based. And borrowers are happy since they're getting low 2% rates, making borrowing much cheaper in the yuan than in many other currencies. As these markets deepen, global investors have more reason to hold yuan assets. Now, the change is not only financial, it also signals to borrowers, whether it's Africa or Central Asia, that access to Chinese credit will increasingly mean exposure to China's currency, not America's. Currency dominance is more than loans and trade. It requires infrastructure, the pipes and channels through which money moves. And China's now laid down much of that financial infrastructure, and many countries are already using it. First, CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system. This is China's alternative to SWIFT. It already has over 1,700 banks worldwide as members, and transaction volumes have reached 175 trillion yuan, around $24 trillion. In 2024, it's seen a 43% increase year on year. Yuan clearing banks have now been set up, and they exist in 33 markets, including Turkey and Mauritius. Now, that reach makes it much easier for companies in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia to bypass dollar intermediaries altogether. These banks can now receive, process, and settle payments in yuan for other banks or businesses in its regions. The payments no longer have to go through the dollar or the euro, but can directly go between the two currencies of the two counterparties trading together. China's also set up a digital yuan, which is already in circulation domestically. They did this to hinder the rise of many cryptocurrencies, which they could not trace in terms of buyers and sellers. But the digital yuan now makes it easy not to use dollars in trade. Similarly, they have a major project that's been developed through the BRICS platform, the M-Bridge project, a project which the Americans are very unhappy with. It's been developed in conjunction with the UAE, Hong Kong, and Thailand, and it's processed billions of dollars in transactions already. China's regulators have directed its own banks to increase their use of M-Bridge. And a US official recently admitted that it has already passed the threshold of geopolitical consequence. Together, these systems allow China to transact globally without relying on dollar-based networks. Another tool is the People's Bank of China's network of swap lines. As I mentioned earlier, since 2009, China has signed over 4.5 trillion yuan worth of bilateral currency swap agreements with 32 central banks. These arrangements allow foreign monetary authorities to obtain yuan in a crisis, and it ensures that they can settle trade or finance obligations. So far, only a fraction has been used, but the point is psychological. Countries know the liquidity backstop is there. In effect, Beijing's created a parallel financial safety net on a scale comparable to the IMF. And you can understand why this would strengthen the role of the yuan. History suggests it takes half a century for a currency to dominate. The US dollar needed a new world order after World War II before it became unchallenged. But today the world moves faster. Dollar trust is eroding, America's deficits are ballooning, and Beijing has already built much of that financial plumbing it needs for an alternative system. The yuan is still far from replacing the dollar, but it no longer needs to. It just needs to rise to that 10 to 15% of global reserves. The balance of global finance will look very different. For countries facing sanctions or simply looking to diversify, the yuan already offers a way out. And every time it's used to settle oil, to back a loan, or to anchor a swap line, the system tilts a little bit away from the Washington. Now, the question is no longer if the yuan will matter, it's how fast the shift will come and how the world will adjust to this new financial order where money itself has more than one center of gravity. I'm Najma Minhas with GVS Deep Dive. Thank you for watching me, and
Well, the United States has just made another mistake with the tariff war, as U.S. sanctions against China's nuclear power industry have officially backfired and now given China a competitive advantage in one of the most important sectors for the future of our world. Now, you might not know a lot about nuclear energy, but it's kind of like the space race between the Soviet Union and the United States back in the 1960s. But now the race is for nuclear power, and both the U.S. and China have announced ambitious goals to rapidly develop nuclear energy in the coming decades. The U.S. Department of Energy declared last year they want to triple nuclear energy capacity by 2050, while China announced it will double nuclear power capacity by 2040 in a rapid buildup. Driven by concerns about climate change and energy security, most countries around the world are turning to nuclear energy as a preferred source of power for the future. But here is where our story gets very interesting. 7 years ago, the United States decided to target China and pass sanctions against China's nuclear power industry to stop China from advancing. Now, anytime the United States passes sanctions against China, it's always labeled as a national security risk. And we've seen this in a variety of industries. When the US government targeted TikTok, they cited national security risks. When the US government banned the import of Chinese electric vehicles, they once again warned of national security risks. Even the Pentagon produced a report warning how Chinese-made cargo cranes at US ports are potential national security risks. The anti-China rhetoric in the United States has become so ridiculous that even this simple kitchen air fryer from China has some analysts believing it will send your data to Beijing when you are cooking a piece of chicken. I know it sounds ridiculous, and trust me, it is. But here's an important detail. In complicated fields like nuclear energy, collaboration, not paranoia, is needed to advance these industries. Just listen to this quote from Director General of the World Nuclear Association, who states, "Our position has always been that the nuclear industry is global, and we would like to see countries working together and sharing best practices and lessons learned. Many countries are looking to triple or even quadruple their nuclear capacity. But achieving these goals will require rebuilding and reintegrating supply chains and industrial capabilities." Essentially, what she is saying is that if the world is going to shift to nuclear energy, it can only be done if countries work together. Despite US sanctions against China's nuclear power industry, China has emerged as the world leader and is in the strongest position for the future, with a new report claiming the United States is now 15 years behind China on nuclear power. And this is where you honestly have to give China a lot of credit. Despite breaking ground on its first reactor almost 40 years after the US pioneered the tech, China is now building far more fission power plants than any other country. Around 10 new reactors have been approved by the Chinese government each year since 2022, putting China on track to overtake the United States and become the world's largest generator of nuclear power by 2030. Everyone, I'm going to break down the entire story of how China made this incredible leap. But first, give me a moment of your time as I tell you about today's video sponsor, Kickoff, who can help you improve your credit. Whether it's buying your first home, getting approved for a car loan, or even qualifying for better interest rates, credit impacts almost everything. But building it isn't always easy. And that's where today's sponsor, Kickoff, can help. Kickoff is the #1 credit building app on the App Store, and it's designed to help you build credit safely and easily. Here's how it works. You can sign up in minutes with no credit check, no hidden fees, and no interest. Affordable plans start at just $5 a month, and every on-time payment you make is automatically reported to all 3 major credit card bureaus, helping you build positive payment history and lower your utilization. And with AutoPay, it's super easy to stay on track. Kickoff users who started with a credit under 600 saw on average a 25-point increase in their first month and up to 84 points after a year, just by keeping their account open and making on-time payments. I'm actually in the process of buying a new home myself, and maintaining a high credit score has been crucial for our family, saving us thousands in interest. And that's why I think Kickoff is such a powerful tool. It gives you the chance to set up yourself for a stronger financial future. So if your credit is holding you back, Kickoff is the safest and easiest way to build it. And as my loyal subscriber, you're going to enjoy a discount of 80% off the first month. That's as low as just $1. Just click the link in my description to get started and visit getkickoff.com/Cyrus. But now let's get back to our story and tell you how the US government's intention has always been to stop China's growth. But realistically, you simply can't stop China, the country with the most amount of STEM graduates. Just look at this new article from the SCMP, which shows how US nuclear sanctions on China have backfired. Washington's strict blacklist rule amid national security concerns has forced Beijing to become self-sufficient with incredible results. And this is one of the most common reoccurring stories we continue to see in the US-China relationship. The US government wants to gain the upper edge against China, so it devises a plan to sanction China's access to critical technologies in an effort to contain China's rise. But literally, every single time the US government does this exact move, the result is always the same. China responds by doubling down its domestic production, pours billions of investment capital into research and development, and within a few short years, China emerges with technology that is superior to that of the Americans. The first example of this came in 2011, when the US government banned Chinese astronauts from the International Space Station. This move would turn into a complete disaster for the US, as the ISS was always designed to be open for the world's brightest astronauts to gather and conduct research that would benefit humanity. American and Chinese astronauts don't care about the political differences of their respective countries. These are the world's smartest scientists and engineers. They simply want to work together to solve complex problems. But when Chinese astronauts were not allowed to travel to the ISS, what did China do in response? It built its own space station from scratch and launched a brand new permanent space station just 11 years later. But allow me to give you another case study, which comes in arguably the most important technology sector of our generation. And that, of course, is the semiconductor industry. And once again, it's the same mistake from the US government. For decades, China happily bought billions of dollars worth of microchips from American companies, and American companies used the revenue they generated in China to fund their research and development. But as the rivalry between the US and China, specifically in the AI industry, began to grow, former President Joe Biden forced American companies to stop exporting US-made chips to China to once again contain China's rise and secure America's lead for the future. Did it work? Of course not, as China simply tripled the amount of output of AI chips to remain competitive in this new race for AI supremacy with the Americans. And here we are today, less than 3 years later, and the tables have been completely reversed. China just announced this week it will ban Chinese tech companies from buying American chips, as the domestic Chinese market has officially caught up with the Americans. China's AI processors have now reached a level comparable to or exceeding that of the NVIDIA products allowed under export controls. This is a remarkable change that happened in less than 3 years, and this is China's speed and ingenuity at its best. And it's a powerful lesson to learn why one should never bet against China from figuring out a solution to even its most complex problems. Earlier this summer, when the Director General of the World Nuclear Association visited China and toured the country's nuclear facilities, she said, "I couldn't close my mouth in amazement," as she was stunned by China's advanced capabilities and incredible industrial scale. She added that everyone is taking note of what is happening in China. And according to the data from the World Nuclear Association, 7 of the 10 most recent nuclear power projects to begin construction since last July belong to China, while the other 3 are from Russia, South Korea, and Pakistan. Philip Andrew Speed, a senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, summed up China's advancements perfectly. China has built an almost complete supply chain for nuclear power, along with the skilled labor force needed to build and operate the world's fastest growing fleet of plants. Building supply chains, recruiting skilled workers, and scaling operations to a point that allows market domination is literally what China does best. Let's not forget that China is the top trading partner for over 120 countries around the globe and is the world's sole manufacturing superpower with 35% of global output. But when we look specifically at clean energy technology, there is no question that China will continue to dominate the future of this entire industry across all verticals. China owns a 70% market share of electric vehicles, 75% of lithium-ion batteries, 65% of wind turbines, and a resounding 82% of solar panels. China just announced the construction of the world's largest dam through the Tibetan Mountains, and when completed, this one project alone will produce enough hydroelectricity to power the equivalent of the United Kingdom. However, the story is different when it comes to countries like the US and France, two nations who once dominated nuclear technology development. Due to consistent problems like public opposition, rising costs, and regulatory challenges, construction of large-scale nuclear power plants in these countries have stagnated for many decades, once again opening the door for China to dominate this industry. Due to the lack of construction in Western countries, domestic supply chains have shut down, employees have left the industry, and realistically, the only way for the US and European countries to build nuclear power plants on time and efficiently would be to partner with Chinese manufacturers. Let me give you a case study to examine how China recently completed the Fuqing 5 unit in southeastern Fujian province. The project involved over 5,300 suppliers nationwide, with all core equipment produced domestically in-house in China. The project also helped China to train professionals in the core technologies and construction of third-generation nuclear power plants. As a result, China has exported at least 15 nuclear power units and research facilities worldwide, with the Karachi nuclear power plant in Pakistan being China's first overseas nuclear power unit to use this new Chinese technology. Everyone, as we come to the conclusion of today's video, I want you to realize that nuclear power and other renewable energies are the future of our world. Nuclear power is undergoing a global resurgence, with more than 30 countries pledging to triple global capacity by mid-century. Tech giants including Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are also investing in nuclear power to fuel their energy-intensive AI data centers and reduce carbon emissions. As we've laid out in today's video, China has emerged as the world leader in nuclear energy and will be for the foreseeable future. The only question that remains is if the US and Europe can swallow their pride and partner with China to produce a greener and more carbon-neutral planet for our future generations. Once again, I want to thank today's video sponsor Kickoff for their generous support to the YouTube channel. Make sure you click the links down below and help improve your credit.
Chinese media is also boosting coverage of the big parade next week, right, where the military is set to showcase its anti-ship missiles, combat drones, and nuclear-capable ballistic missiles.
We're watching live pictures tonight, right now, a massive parade underway in Beijing as the Chinese President Xi Jinping is showing off his country's arsenal.
American carriers have been a nightmare for Chinese military planners.
September 3rd, 2025. Beijing, Tiananmen Square. The world gathered its gaze on China's Grand Victory Day parade, a spectacle of tanks, drones, aircraft, and intercontinental ballistic missiles rolling past a crowd of more than 20 world leaders, including Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un. But among all the weaponry on display that day, there was one section that electrified analysts across the globe. A dedicated lineup of anti-ship missiles. And hidden within that line, gleaming under the Beijing sun, was a weapon that may forever change naval warfare. The YJ-19 hypersonic cruise missile. This wasn't just another missile. It was a declaration of intent, a weapon designed not for deterrence alone, but for destruction. And its target? The crown jewel of American power, the aircraft carrier. Welcome back to Race to Space, where we dive deep into the weapons, strategies, and rivalries that define the future of global conflict. Today, we're peeling back the layers on China's brand new carrier killer, the YJ-19, and asking a chilling question: has China just created the perfect weapon to sink America's Navy in minutes? When Xi Jinping gave his Victory Day speech, he didn't just talk about history, he framed the future. Behind him rolled weapons that underscored Beijing's new vision of warfare: long-range precision, hypersonic speed, and anti-access power projection. Among the heavy armor and missiles were 4 names that made every U.S. naval commander sit up in their chair: YJ-15, YJ-17, YJ-19, and YJ-20. Each of them deadly, but only one of them had that aura of mystery, that mix of speed, stealth, and unpredictability that screamed game over for the carrier era. That was the YJ-19. On the surface, the YJ-19 looks like a conventional cruise missile, but it carries one secret that makes it revolutionary: a scramjet engine. Most anti-ship missiles, even advanced ones, use turbojet or ramjet engines. They're fast, but they top out around Mach 3. The YJ-19, it's in a completely different class. Its supersonic combustion ramjet engine allows it to sustain speeds of Mach 6 to Mach 7, that is 7 times the speed of sound, all while flying lower, faster, and more unpredictably than anything the US Navy has ever faced. Think about that for a second. A missile launched from thousands of kilometers away, flying so fast that by the time radar sees it, it's practically at your doorstep. Now add this. The YJ-19 isn't forced to take a straight path. Its scramjet propulsion allows it to maneuver, dodge, and weave mid-flight. It doesn't glide predictably, it hunts. For over 80 years, the aircraft carrier has been the symbol of American naval dominance. Massive floating air bases, capable of projecting power thousands of kilometers from U.S. shores. But the YJ-19 turns that strength into a liability. Here's why. U.S. carriers are defended by layers of missile interceptors, radar, and advanced systems like the Aegis Combat System. In theory, these defenses can detect and shoot down incoming missiles. But hypersonic weapons like the YJ-19 break that defense chain in 3 ways. Speed. Traveling at Mach 6 or more, the YJ-19 gives defenders less than a minute to detect, track, and respond. Most interceptors can't even keep up. Altitude shifts. Unlike ballistic missiles, the YJ-19 can fly low to the sea surface. In its terminal phase, it skims the ocean waves, making radar detection nearly impossible until it's seconds away from impact. Maneuverability. Instead of following a predictable arc, it zigzags mid-flight, forcing U.S. defenses to guess its next move. A wrong guess, and the missile slips through. And here's the most chilling part. A single YJ-19 warhead could disable or even sink a trillion-dollar carrier in one strike. So how does the YJ-19's engine make it so lethal? Unlike a regular jet engine, which slows incoming air before combustion, a scramjet, short for supersonic combustion ramjet, burns fuel in supersonic airflow. The result is raw, blistering thrust. The YJ-19 rides its scramjet like a rocket, screaming across the sky at hypersonic velocity. Because it doesn't carry heavy oxidizers like rockets do, it's lighter, longer ranged, and more efficient. This means China can launch the YJ-19 from land-based launchers, aircraft, submarines, or even warships. From there, it can reach targets across the first island chain, Japan, Taiwan, Guam, or even the second island chain, stretching deep into the Pacific. For the first time, U.S. carriers in those waters face a weapon that could erase them from the battlefield in under 5 minutes. China didn't parade the YJ-19 by accident. It wasn't just a weapons display, it was a psychological message. Xi Jinping stood on Tiananmen Square and essentially told the world, "Your carriers mean nothing now." In the US, analysts scrambled. Satellite images showed YJ-19 launchers in multiple regions. Navy commanders debated whether existing defense systems could stop such a weapon. And the Pentagon quietly admitted there is no foolproof defense against hypersonic missiles yet. That is the genius of China's parade. It didn't need to fire a missile. Just rolling the YJ-19 past cameras was enough to send shivers through Washington. So why is the YJ-19 the most talked about missile, even when China paraded others? YJ-15, a supersonic anti-ship missile, fast but conventional. YJ-17, longer range with stealth shaping, but still limited to Mach 3. YJ-20, a classified hypersonic glide vehicle. Think of a smaller DF-17, devastating but ballistic in its flight path. The YJ-19 combined the best of all worlds, hypersonic speed, maneuverability, and low-altitude terminal attack. In short, it wasn't just new, it was game-changing. The United States Navy is the most powerful in history, 11 carrier strike groups, each one a floating city. But the YJ-19 highlights a terrifying reality. Those giant carriers are big, slow, invisible targets. Carriers were designed to project air power in a world where enemies had no hypersonic missiles. That world is gone. Now they're like castles in the age of gunpowder. Impressive, intimidating, but increasingly obsolete. In war games, U.S. defense systems like SM-6 interceptors and laser weapons have been tested against hypersonic threats, but success rates are low. Against a salvo of dozens of YJ-19s launched at once, even the best defenses would be overwhelmed. For the first time since World War II, America's carriers face a weapon that can make them irrelevant overnight. Here's the kicker. The YJ-19 is just the beginning. Reports suggest China is already working on next-gen scramjet missiles capable of Mach 9 speeds. Others are rumored to carry AI-enabled targeting, able to adjust in real time against jamming and decoys. And with China's growing arsenal of satellites, over-the-horizon radars, and drones, spotting carriers and feeding that targeting data to missiles like the YJ-19 is becoming easier by the day. The message is clear. China wants to dominate the seas without ever needing a navy as large as America's. Instead of matching carriers with carriers, it's matching carriers with missiles that make them obsolete. The YJ-19 wasn't just another missile in China's 2025 parade. It was a turning point, a weapon that said, your biggest ships are now your biggest weaknesses. This is Race to Space, and the countdown to tomorrow's warfare has already begun. That could. Every empire has a moment when it signals to the world, we can end everything. On September 3rd, 2025, at Beijing's Victory Day Parade, China didn't just flex its military muscle, it unveiled the weapons that could erase cities, topple empires, and silence oceans. The world expected tanks, aircraft, and missiles. But what it saw was the nuclear fist of China, a trinity of intercontinental ballistic missiles, each more chilling than the last. The spotlight was on three giants, the DF-5C, the DF-61, and the DF-31BJ. And if you thought China's rise was about carriers, hypersonics, or drones, this parade was a reminder. Nothing defines global power like the nuclear arsenal. This is Race to Space, and today we're going to take you inside China's nuclear authority, reshaped, reloaded, and now stronger than ever. Let's begin with the familiar, the DF-5C, a missile that is already infamous. Imagine this, a missile silo deep inside the mountains of China. Inside sits a DF-5C, towering nearly 36 meters tall, longer than a 10-story building laid on its side. Fueled and ready, this monster has a range of 20,000 kilometers. That's global reach. Any continent, any city. But here's the part that makes the world's generals lose sleep. The DF-5C carries 12 nuclear warheads. Each warhead can be assigned to a different target. 12 cities, 12 military bases, 12 carriers at sea, struck simultaneously. One launch, millions dead. And for the first time in Beijing's 2025 parade, China rolled this weapon across Tiananmen Square for the world to see. A clear message. We don't just have it, we're ready to use it. But the DF-5C wasn't the only terror on wheels that day, because right after it came something even more dangerous. If the DF-5C is the hammer, the DF-61 is the Phantom Blade. This is a road mobile ICBM. That means it doesn't sit in a silo waiting to be targeted. It moves, it hides, it launches when and where China decides. Picture a convoy rolling quietly through the hills of western China. On the surface, it looks like a line of heavy trucks, but under their camouflage netting, they hide the DF-61. When the order comes, they drive into a clearing, erect the launcher, and within minutes, a missile streaks into the sky. With a range of 12,000 kilometers, the DF-61 can fly from Beijing to Washington, D.C. in less than 30 minutes. Its payload, roughly 3.6 tons, enough to carry 7 nuclear warheads, each one powerful enough to vaporize a metropolis. And here's the chilling part. Unlike the liquid-fueled DF-5C, the DF-61 uses solid fuel propulsion. That means no long fueling times, no hours of preparation. It can launch almost instantly. Survivability, mobility, quick deployment. That's what makes the DF-61 terrifying. Even if the U.S. were to strike first, even if bombers and cruise missiles destroyed Chinese bases, the DF-61 could still emerge from the forests, from the deserts, from the mountains, hidden in plain sight, and deliver its nuclear fire. In the language of deterrence, this is called assured retaliation, and that's what the DF-61 promises. If you strike us, we will strike back, and you cannot stop it. But China didn't stop there. After the DF-61 rolled past, the parade brought out a weapon that represents another side of China's nuclear triad, the DF-31BJ. At first glance, it seems less imposing, smaller, lighter, a silo-based missile rather than a mobile giant. But don't be fooled. The DF-31BJ is the latest variant in the DF-31 family, missiles that first entered service in the 1990s. But this version is different. It's designed specifically for silo launches. That means underground bunkers, reinforced by concrete and steel, protected by layers of defense. Its range, more than 11,000 kilometers, which means from deep inside China's heartland, it can strike Los Angeles, New York, or Chicago. Unlike the multi-warhead DF-61, the DF-31BJ carries a single nuclear warhead, but sometimes one is all you need. A single detonation over a city center, millions gone. And because it's silo-based, it represents a different kind of survivability. Fixed, hardened, designed to withstand an enemy's first strike long enough to fire back. In nuclear strategy, diversity matters. You don't just put all your eggs in mobile launchers or submarines or silos. You spread them across all three. And that's exactly what China showcased. A diversified nuclear force that cannot be disarmed in one blow. Let's imagine the nightmare scenario that keeps Pentagon strategists awake at night. Tensions boil over in the Pacific. A clash between navies escalates, missiles fly, aircraft fall, and then in a moment of desperation, a U.S. strike hits Chinese territory. Within minutes, orders ripple through China's strategic rocket force. In a mountain valley, a DF-61TEL raises its launcher. Flames roar, and a missile cuts through the night sky. 7 warheads on board, each bound for American cities. In the depths of China's farmlands, a DF-31BJ roars out of its silo, targeting U.S. military bases. And far away, hidden in another silo, a DF-5C launches its 12 warheads. 30 minutes later, the U.S. East Coast disappears in a storm of fire. Washington, New York, Philadelphia, all gone. This is the grim reality of what these weapons mean, and that's exactly the message China wanted to send in its parade. We can end you if we must. Now, you might be asking, why parade these weapons so openly? Isn't secrecy better for deterrence? Not for China. This was deliberate, public, intentional. The message wasn't just for its own citizens. It was for Washington, for Tokyo, for Canberra, for the entire world watching live. By rolling out the DF-5C, DF-61, and DF-31BJ, China was declaring, our nuclear arsenal is modern, mobile, and survivable. You cannot disarm us. You cannot intimidate us. You cannot ignore us. For decades, the nuclear balance of power was a game between Washington and Moscow. But 2025 may be remembered as the year Beijing truly entered the nuclear big leagues. No longer is China a minor nuclear player with a few dozen missiles. It now fields hundreds, mobile, silo-based, and soon submarine-launched, each one capable of striking the U.S. homeland. This doesn't just change strategy, it changes psychology. Because nuclear war isn't about fighting, it's about fear, about making your opponent believe that no matter what they do, striking you means their own destruction. And with the DF-61 and DF-31BJ now standing beside the DF-5C, China has ensured exactly that. September 3rd, 2025, the streets of Beijing became more than just a parade ground. They became a stage for the unveiling of a new nuclear era. Before the eyes of the world, the People's Liberation Army rolled out its deadliest cards, and with each weapon, the old balance of fear cracked a little more. The DF-5C, a weapon that can strike any point on Earth, carrying 12 independent warheads. One missile, 12 cities erased. This isn't deterrence. This is the promise of apocalypse, delivered in a single launch. This was Race to Space, where we decode the weapons, strategies, and turning points that are shaping tomorrow's conflicts today. If this breakdown left you with questions or chills, subscribe and stay with us, because the nuclear chessboard has been reset. And make no mistake, the kingmaker in this new game is no longer Washington. Its name is China.
China is gearing up for Victory Day. Military bands, staff, and soldiers of Chinese People's Liberation Army are undergoing intensive training ahead of a grand military parade.
We're watching live pictures tonight. Right now, a massive parade underway in Beijing as the Chinese President Xi Jinping is showing off his country's arsenal and military might to the world.
They said alliances are fragile, that great powers can never truly stand side by side, that history, rivalry, and mistrust will always keep them divided. But on September 3rd, 2025, in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, history took a turn that no one could ignore. In front of the world's cameras, China's Xi Jinping, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and North Korea's Kim Jong-un, three of the most scrutinized, feared, and controversial leaders on Earth, stood shoulder to shoulder. Flanked by more than 20 other world leaders, they didn't just watch a parade, they sent a message. This wasn't just about commemorating the 80th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. This was about something far greater, a declaration that the global order itself is shifting. Welcome back to Race to Space. And tonight, we uncover the shocking implications of the day the East stood united, when China, Russia, and North Korea came together in one of the most symbolic military parades of the modern age. What if the West has already lost its grip on the global order, but simply hasn't realized it yet? Picture the moment. Xi, Putin, and Kim walking side by side across Tiananmen Square as ranks of soldiers march past and nuclear-capable missiles roll by. Cameras flash, crowds cheer, fighter jets streak overhead, their sonic booms echoing like thunder. Now ask yourself, what if this image isn't just symbolic? What if it marks the beginning of an alliance that has the potential to topple U.S. dominance and rewrite international politics forever? It's not speculation anymore. The seeds of this new order are already being planted. And September 3rd, 2025 may be remembered as the day the world shifted from west to east. The timing was no coincidence. September 3rd is China's Victory Day, marking Japan's surrender in World War II. In 1945, China was broken, scarred, and dependent on others for survival. But in 2025, the symbolism could not be clearer. China has risen from victim to superpower. And it wasn't just China's day. By inviting Russia and North Korea, two nations often demonized by the West, Beijing turned the anniversary into something else entirely. A stage for unity. For Putin, who has been locked in confrontation with NATO since the Ukraine war, standing in Beijing was a chance to show the world he is far from isolated. For Kim, whose rare foreign visit was his first to China in 6 years, it was an opportunity to reaffirm North Korea's position in this new Eastern Bloc. And for Xi Jinping, it was the perfect moment to prove that China is no longer standing alone. The military parade itself was breathtaking. Rows upon rows of elite troops marched in flawless precision. Columns of tanks and armored vehicles rolled through the square, gleaming under the Beijing sun. Then came the weapons that stole the show: hypersonic missiles capable of outpacing any Western defense, AI-powered drone submarines, silent hunters that could cripple fleets before they ever reached Chinese shores, The DF-41 and DF-5C ICBMs, intercontinental missiles with ranges that put every U.S. city in the crosshairs. Stealth fighters and sixth-generation prototypes, roaring across the sky in chilling formation. But it wasn't the hardware alone that captured attention, it was the context. These weapons weren't being shown to China's people alone. They were being displayed to the world, with Russia and North Korea watching as honored guests. The message was unmistakable. This is our collective power. Together we are untouchable. At the heart of the parade, Xi Jinping delivered a speech that may go down in history as one of the defining moments of this new era. His words echoed across the square, broadcast live to millions around the globe. He called for peace, but it was peace on China's terms. He warned of conflict, but it was conflict that China, with its allies, was fully prepared to win. And he gave the world a choice: accept the reality of a new power structure or risk confrontation with an alliance that cannot be broken. Every sentence was carefully crafted, every pause deliberate. It wasn't just a speech, it was a warning shot to Washington, Tokyo, Seoul, and every Western capital watching nervously. On the surface, China, Russia, and North Korea may seem like uneasy partners. Different histories, different systems, different ambitions. But look deeper, and the logic of their alliance becomes clear. China provides economic power, advanced technology, and global influence. Russia brings vast energy resources, a hardened military, and nuclear capability. North Korea contributes unpredictability, manpower, and a strategic wedge on the Korean peninsula. Together, they form something the West has long feared: a counterweight strong enough to defy the US-led world order. Imagine NATO trying to plan for a conflict not against one adversary, but three. Imagine US forces stretched thin across Europe, the Pacific, and the Korean peninsula simultaneously. That's the nightmare scenario this alliance represents. Perhaps the most surprising presence was Kim Jong-un. For years, North Korea had been drifting, its ties with Beijing strained, its economy battered by sanctions, its diplomacy reduced to fiery threats. But Kim's appearance in Beijing marked a turning point. By standing alongside Xi and Putin, he signaled that North Korea is not isolated, but deeply integrated into a broader anti-Western coalition. This wasn't just ceremonial. Behind the scenes, discussions reportedly touched on closer military cooperation, joint exercises, and even technology sharing. For North Korea, this could mean access to advanced missile guidance, drone technologies, or naval support. For China and Russia, it means having an unpredictable but loyal ally anchoring the eastern flank of this new bloc. For Vladimir Putin, the parade was more than symbolic. It was defiance made visible. Since the Ukraine war, the West has tried to isolate Russia with sanctions, boycotts, and military support for Kiev. Yet there he was, walking proudly in Beijing, treated as a central figure in the new alliance. His presence sent a chilling message. The sanctions haven't broken him, NATO hasn't stopped him, and Russia is far from alone. If anything, the West's attempts to weaken Russia may have backfired, pushing Moscow even closer to Beijing, and now even to Pyongyang. Now, if you're wondering about the weapons displayed in the parade, yes, they were terrifying. Yes, the missiles, drones, and stealth fighters proved China's rapid technological rise. But the real power of September 3rd, 2025, wasn't the hardware, it was the unity. For decades, the West relied on division to maintain dominance. Divide Moscow from Beijing, keep North Korea isolated, prevent any Eastern Bloc from emerging. But in Tiananmen Square, the cracks in that strategy were laid bare. The divisions are healing, the bloc is forming, and the balance of global power is shifting right before our eyes. The United States and its allies now face a reality they long feared. The world is no longer bipolar, it's becoming multipolar, with rival centers of power rising fast. September 3rd was more than a parade. It was a preview of what's to come. China, Russia, and North Korea are not just posing together for the cameras. They are aligning their militaries, their economies, and their strategies. And the world is watching. This was more than a parade. This was the birth of a new bloc. A bloc built on shared defiance, mutual strength, and unshakable resolve. China, Russia, and North Korea. Side by side, a triangle of power challenging the circle of the West. And as the echoes of marching boots fade, one truth remains. September 3rd, 2025 will be remembered not just as a celebration of history, but as the day a new history began.
Being here today. I want to draw your attention to a story that, while unlikely to dominate the 24-hour news cycle, carries profound implications for the future of American foreign policy, the global economy, and the very balance of world power. The headline is stark. China warns U.S. on Venezuela power shift. At first glance, it may seem like just another diplomatic dispute, another headline in a sea of international tensions. But I assure you, it is far more significant than that. For over a century, the United States has operated under the assumption that Latin America is its backyard, a sphere of influence where its authority is absolute. This principle, an extension of the Monroe Doctrine, has shaped American policy in the hemisphere, often with devastating consequences for the nations involved. Venezuela, with its vast oil reserves, the largest proven reserves on the planet, has long been a focal point of this policy. Washington has repeatedly attempted to influence, destabilize, or outright control Venezuela's leadership, almost always under the noble sounding banner of restoring democracy. But let's be clear about the underlying motives. This has always been a struggle for control over resources, access to markets, and geopolitical dominance. Now, a new global power has stepped onto this stage, directly into what the United States once considered its uncontested territory. Beijing has issued a clear and direct warning to Washington: do not interfere with Venezuela's internal political processes. Why has China taken such a bold stance? The answer lies in economics and strategy. Over the last 2 decades, China has become one of Venezuela's most crucial economic partners, investing tens of billions of dollars into its infrastructure, oil industry, and trade networks. For China, Venezuela is not merely a trading partner, it is a strategic asset in its long-term vision to reshape global alliances, creating a world less dependent on the grip of Washington and the US dollar. The American foreign policy establishment views this as a direct and intolerable challenge to its hegemony. But we must ask a deeper question. Why does China's involvement in a single Latin American nation matter so profoundly? The answer is that this event is a symptom of a much larger global transformation. The era of a unipolar world, where the United States could unilaterally dictate terms to smaller nations with little resistance, is rapidly coming to an end. China, alongside other emerging powers, is signaling that America's actions will no longer go unchecked. There will be consequences. Herein lies the uncomfortable truth that leaders in Washington are reluctant to admit to the American people. The obsession with controlling Venezuela has never been primarily about freedom or human rights. It is about who controls the flow of oil. It is about which corporations secure the lucrative contracts for rebuilding and extraction. Ultimately, it is about who gets to write the rules of the global economy. China's warning is a clear declaration that the era of America's monopoly on rulemaking is over. This should serve as a critical wake-up call for every American. We are told that these foreign interventions are necessary for our national security. But while our government spends billions, perhaps trillions, on sanctions, covert operations, and power plays in countries thousands of miles away, what is happening here at home? Our infrastructure is crumbling, our education system is underfunded, our health care is unaffordable for millions, and working families struggle to make ends meet. Why do we allow a political elite in Washington to gamble with global stability while our own communities decay? So I ask you directly, when you hear the headline, China warns the US, does your mind immediately jump to the possibility of military conflict, or do you consider the reality of economic competition? Because in the 21st century, they are two sides of the same coin. The danger is that Washington, refusing to accept this new reality, will continue to escalate tensions, pushing the world toward a dangerous confrontation, all while ignoring the pressing economic and social crises we face right here at home. The game has changed, and it's time our priorities did too. Let us be absolutely clear. This is not simply about Venezuela. What we are witnessing is a direct challenge to decades of American dominance. When China steps into Latin America, it isn't just investing in oil fields or building ports. It is delivering a loud, disruptive, and deeply unsettling message to policymakers in Washington. You no longer have a monopoly here. This is a symbolic move with enormous weight. Just as Washington once sought to encircle China with alliances in Asia, Beijing is now testing whether it can chip away at America's control in the Western Hemisphere. This is the dilemma that makes the Venezuelan question so much bigger than it appears. The United States knows it cannot afford another endless geopolitical struggle, not while its economy is fragile and its politics are deeply divided. Yet, it cannot simply ignore China's advance without appearing weak on the world stage. For Beijing, this is about more than oil. It is about rewriting the rules of global power on America's very doorstep. The real story, then, is not just about which superpower Venezuela tilts toward. The real story is that nations once considered subordinate to American demands are discovering they have alternatives. They no longer have to bow to Washington's conditions because another global power is offering loans, technology, and partnerships, often without the attached lectures on democracy. For many governments, that is an incredibly attractive proposition. And for ordinary Americans, every deal that shifts away from US control is a stark reminder that the global economy is changing in ways Washington can no longer fully manage. The United States can no longer snap its fingers and expect compliance, and that reality is deeply unsettling to an establishment accustomed to unquestioned dominance. Today, Venezuela stands at the epicenter of this geopolitical contest. To the casual observer, it may appear as just another nation grappling with internal instability. But to the world's most powerful states, it represents a critical battleground for influence, resources, and the future of global alliances. This is about who controls access to the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia. In an age where energy security remains a cornerstone of global power, that single fact explains Washington's decades-long refusal to let Venezuela slip from its orbit. But once Caracas began to resist that dominance and forge its own partnerships with China and Russia, the country was transformed into an arena of great power confrontation. The struggle is no longer abstract. It is about who benefits from Venezuela's resources. More importantly, it's about the political message this struggle sends to the rest of the world. If Washington cannot enforce its will in a nation it once controlled, what does that signal about the durability of American power? Conversely, if China can establish itself as a reliable partner through investment and diplomacy, what does that say about the emerging global order? Venezuela has become the ultimate testing ground where the credibility of both Washington and Beijing is being measured not just by Latin America, but by the entire international community. It is an ideological battle as much as an economic one. Washington frames its interventions in the language of democracy, while Beijing counters with a narrative of national sovereignty and mutual benefit. These are competing visions for the world, and nations across the global south are watching intently to see which one proves more persuasive. Venezuela's strategic location amplifies this drama, turning it into a symbolic strike against the Monroe Doctrine. Every decision made in Caracas now reverberates in capitals across the globe as nations quietly assess whether American pressure still carries the force it once did. And let us not forget, Venezuela is not a passive pawn in this game. Its leadership has skillfully played one superpower against another, leveraging its strategic importance to resist isolation and survive. It is a nation that has turned its geopolitical vulnerability into bargaining power. By aligning with new partners, Venezuela has forced Washington to confront a reality it long sought to deny. The monopoly on influence in Latin America is gone. What makes Venezuela such a pivotal battleground is that it embodies the broader global shift from a unipolar to a multipolar world. The oil, the alliances, the symbolic defiance all combine to make this a stage where the future of global power is being rehearsed in real time. For nearly 3 decades after the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States stood as the undisputed global superpower in what policymakers proudly called the unipolar moment. That illusion is now colliding with a new reality. The decline of unipolarity is no longer a future prediction. It is happening now, and Venezuela is a prime exhibit. America's global authority has long rested on 3 pillars: unrivaled military strength, control over global finance, and the narrative of defending democracy. Today, each of those pillars is showing cracks. Militarily, the American public is weary of endless wars that deliver neither stability abroad nor prosperity at home. Economically, the dollar's supremacy is being challenged as nations like China and Russia build alternative financial systems. And politically, the claim to be the global defender of democracy rings hollow when Washington supports authoritarian regimes that serve its strategic interests. What once seemed unshakable now appears fragile. Despite imposing the harshest sanctions in modern history, the Venezuelan government remains in power, bolstered by support from nations willing to defy U.S. pressure. The message is clear. America's tools of dominance no longer guarantee results. Simultaneously, China is not just contesting U.S. influence, it is building an alternative world order through initiatives like the Belt and Road. For countries like Venezuela, these alternatives mean that U.S. sanctions, once a devastating economic weapon, are losing their sting. When a nation can turn to Beijing or Moscow for loans and markets, Washington's ability to enforce compliance erodes. This is the broader global recalibration of power. And what makes this moment so dangerous is how the United States will choose to respond to its waning influence. The stakes could not be higher. History teaches us a sobering lesson. Empires rarely step back gracefully. They resist, they lash out. They cling to the fantasy that they can restore their former glory through just a little more force, a little more pressure. The risk we face today is that Washington escalates conflicts precisely because it senses its grip is slipping. And here is the hook for every citizen who cares about the future of this country. A declining power often becomes more reckless, not less. That recklessness carries devastating consequences, not just for the world, but for us here at home, where precious resources are drained for foreign adventures and our own freedoms are compromised in the name of maintaining global control. We must also recognize that this shift is not just about the rise of China or the resurgence of Russia. It is about the growing confidence of nations all across the global South. Countries that were once entirely dependent on U.S. aid or lived in fear of U.S. sanctions now see new options on the horizon. They are building robust regional alliances, engaging with a multitude of global partners, and asserting their national independence in ways that would have been unthinkable just a generation ago. From the capitals of Africa and Asia to our own hemisphere in Latin America, the message is the same. Washington is no longer the only power at the table. The choice before us, therefore, is not merely one of foreign policy. It is a fundamental choice about our national soul and our future. One path leads us to continue clinging to the vestiges of a fading empire. It is a well-trodden path of escalating tensions, perpetually bloated military budgets, and a foreign policy establishment that views every rising nation not as a potential partner, but as a threat to be contained or defeated. This path demands that we sacrifice our own pressing domestic priorities, the rebuilding of our schools, the affordability of our health care, the modernization of our cities on the altar of global dominance. It is a path that asks the American people to endlessly bear the human and financial costs of conflict, while a small, insulated elite reaps the strategic and economic rewards. The other path is one of pragmatism, humility, and national renewal. It is a path that recognizes the inherent limits of American power and embraces the wisdom of strategic restraint. This path calls for a grand reinvestment in our own country, first in our people, our infrastructure, and our capacity to innovate for the future. It means engaging with a complex world, not as a hegemon demanding obedience, but as a confident and secure partner seeking common ground on truly existential shared challenges. From climate change and pandemics to nuclear proliferation and economic instability. This is not a vision of isolation or retreat. It is a call for a smarter, more sustainable, and more respected form of global leadership, one based on the undeniable power of our example, not the diminishing example of our power. It is a future where our national security is measured not by how many foreign conflicts we are entangled in, but by how much prosperity, stability, and opportunity we can build for our own citizens right here at home. This new reality raises profound and unavoidable questions for every American. What does it truly mean for us to live in a world where our government cannot simply dictate terms? What does it mean for our future when other nations openly defy American pressure and do not collapse? Most importantly, how should our nation respond? Do we double down on a failed and costly strategy of domination? Or do we finally find the wisdom to adapt to a new world, a world where cooperation must replace hegemony? The unipolar moment has passed. What comes next will be defined not by America's ability to command, but by its willingness to accept a world in which it is one great power among many. Thank you.
There will be no one left to bury the victims. With this thunderous statement, Russian lawmaker Andriy Kolesnik delivered an unprecedented warning to Trump and his allies. It was not a passing remark, but a strategic message carrying within it the promise of a weapon never before revealed. A weapon Moscow claims is even more powerful than Orshnik and more destructive than anything the West has seen so far. Behind the scenes, satellites and early warning aircraft are on high alert, monitoring for any mysterious tests, while military think tanks in Washington and Brussels race to model possible scenarios. Are we facing an unprecedented offensive system, one that surpasses Orshnik in power and in its ability to break through Western defenses? The Russian message is clear. Any direct confrontation would escalate the conflict to a level unseen since the Cold War. In this episode, our channel brings you an exclusive look at this secret weapon, placing it under the microscope to uncover its secrets and what it could mean for the future of the standoff between Moscow and the West. Stay with us until the end and don't forget to support us by liking the video. Osina, potent secret weapon under the microscope. This story begins with a fleeting blip caught by American early warning systems, an unidentified target traveling faster than standard radar tracking could follow, executing asymmetric maneuvers high in the atmosphere, as if a new generation of deterrent weapons had quietly entered service without any official announcement from the Russian military. Amid this fog emerges the name now at the center of expert discussions: Osina, a project confirmed by Strategic Missile Forces Commander Sergei Karakayev on December 17, 2024, as a new strategic system developed in parallel with the medium-range hypersonic Orishnik program. Osina is presented as the next generation, heavier, deadlier, and higher on the deterrence ladder, and the closest candidate for the weapon that Kolesnik hinted at when he made his chilling statement: "There will be no one left to bury the victims." To grasp the magnitude of the threat, we must revisit Oreshnik itself, the missile that terrified the West. A medium-range hypersonic ballistic missile, Oreshnik has been recorded reaching speeds between Mach 10 and Mach 11, capable of carrying multiple re-entry warheads, and when deployed in Belarus, it covers most, if not all, of Europe. From this lineage is born Osina, a solid-fuel missile whose roots trace back to the RS-26 Rubes family, which was tested at ranges between 2,000 and 5,800 kilometers. It launches in successive stages, each one propelling it faster before separating, making the missile lighter and accelerating it to hypersonic speeds that nearly push the limits of physics. Osina's airframe is built from heat-resistant alloys designed to withstand the extreme friction generated at such speeds, with a variable flight path that turns interception into a nightmare for any missile defense system. Estimates suggest massive dimensions, a length approaching 20 meters, a diameter between 1.8 and 2 meters, and a launch weight between 36 and 50 tons. Numbers that confirm we are facing a heavier, more powerful successor to Orshnik. The launch platform is believed to be the same MZKT Belarusian heavy truck used for Yars and Orshnik missiles, granting Osina high mobility and the ability to relocate before enemy satellites can pinpoint its position. Its guidance system follows the well-known Russian doctrine: inertia navigation updated via GLONASS satellites, with MIRV warheads capable of changing course during re-entry and even executing glide maneuvers at high altitudes to evade interception. With its rapid boost phase and shifting trajectory, systems such as Patriot and THAAD have only a narrow window to attempt an intercept. But the real source of fear for Trump and NATO lies in Osina's warhead. Western analysis suggests it carries a high-yield conventional thermobaric warhead, unleashing a massive blast wave and extreme heat that lasts longer than conventional explosions, turning the target area into a burning inferno. Russia has a long history with this class of weapons, having developed the infamous father of all bombs, with an estimated yield of 44 tons of TNT when detonated in mid-air. Imagine the same destructive philosophy mounted on a hypersonic missile traveling at these speeds and ranges. Suddenly, the Russian threat becomes clear, and Kolesnik's warning, "There will be no one left to bury the victims," sounds far more like a statement of fact than mere propaganda. All these indicators make Osina appear to be the very weapon Kolesnik threatened to unleash on the West, the natural candidate for the title of the secret weapon, stronger than Orshnik. And with its official specifications still classified, the analysis remains our closest map to understanding what Moscow may be preparing as the next layer of its strategic deterrence. The dark side of Osina missiles. Despite the aura of mystery surrounding it, Osina is not without weaknesses. Its sheer size and reliance on heavy MZKT mobile launchers make it a high-value target if detected before launch. Satellites and drone swarms could track launcher movements along road networks, forcing Russia to provide continuous protection for its assets. Its launch phase generates an enormous heat signature, immediately detectable by infrared satellites, giving adversaries a brief window to locate the missile and potentially launch a preemptive strike on the platform. With only a limited number of launchers available, losing even one could deliver a major blow to Russia's offensive capability. The guidance system, though highly accurate, may still be vulnerable to advanced electronic warfare. Jamming or spoofing GLONASS signals could degrade accuracy, particularly against high-value targets requiring pinpoint precision. And while the thermobaric warhead is devastating, its sheer weight limits the missile to carrying a single warhead, reducing its flexibility for engaging multiple targets simultaneously. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Osina is not technical, but strategic. Launching such a fast, destructive missile, even with a conventional warhead, could easily be mistaken by NATO for a strategic nuclear strike, prompting an immediate retaliatory response before the warhead's nature is even confirmed. This risk of nuclear miscalculation is what makes Osina both a powerful deterrent and a potential trigger for global catastrophe. Finally, the human cost. A thermobaric detonation does not just destroy infrastructure, it consumes oxygen, creates a massive pressure wave, and turns enclosed shelters into death traps. Analysts have described such effect as leaving the target area nearly devoid of life, a chilling echo of Kolesnik's warning, "There will be no one left to bury the victims." And you, dear viewer, do you think Osina could be the secret missile Russian officials hinted at, the one said to surpass Orishnik in power and capability? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to support the channel by subscribing and hitting the bell icon.
Right. So the Abraham Accords were supposed to climax with Saudi Arabia signing up to them. They were the great prize, weren't they? The crown jewel, the stamp of legitimacy that would bury Palestine, give Trump bragging rights for days, and crown Netanyahu as some sort of a master strategist. Instead, Tel Aviv managed to blow up his own victory parade with all the subtlety of a dynamite vest. Bombing Doha during ceasefire talks was sold as self-defense. The only thing Israel defended was his reputation as the region's most reckless arsonist. The result has been a spectacularly bad set of events for Israel, courtesy of the Saudis now. Mohammed bin Salman walked away from that notion of normalization and straight into the arms of Pakistan, the one ally Israel never wanted Riyadh to touch, a nuclear-armed Muslim state. What was supposed to be Netanyahu's power move against Hamas has become a total humiliation, and for a state that bleats everything it does is in the name of its own security, they've achieved the polar opposite. Another fine Netanyahu-made mess. Right, so history has a way of exposing hubris. For the better part of 2 years, Israel strutted on the global stage as if it were on the verge of its greatest diplomatic triumph. The story went something like this, didn't it? Saudi Arabia, the great prize of the Arab world, the custodian of Mecca and Medina, the linchpin of oil and legitimacy in the Gulf, was finally about to normalize relations with Tel Aviv. The Abraham Accords, launched in 2020, were supposed to be the prelude. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain played the role of pioneers. Morocco and Sudan were folded in as proof of momentum, and all eyes turned to Riyadh. Netanyahu made it clear The day Saudi Arabia joined the accords would be the day Israel secured its place as the indispensable power in the Middle East. Western capitals echoed that line, eager to believe it. Their pet project in the Middle East had come good at last. That illusion has now been spectacularly shattered. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, did not sign a peace deal with Israel at all. He signed a mutual defense pact with Pakistan instead, the only Muslim nuclear power, a country that has never recognized Israel and which has defined much of its post-independence foreign policy around opposition to Zionism. The kick in the teeth could not have been clearer. This was more than just a snub. It was a total reversal, a rebuke, a revelation all at once. At the very moment Netanyahu promised his people a breakthrough following that strike on Doha to take out Hamas's leaders, Israel has found itself more isolated than ever before. The pact was not merely about Riyadh and Islamabad, it was about normalization detonated now, about Israel's recklessness in Doha, boomeranging back and smacking it clean in the face, about the unreliability of the United States as a protector, and about a shifting balance of power in which Saudi Arabia now prefers to hedge with a Muslim ally than embrace Tel Aviv. So to understand quite how we got here, let's dissect this pact, first of all, the choice of Pakistan, the collapse of the Saudi-Israel track, and the wider implications for regional strategy, because none of this has happened by accident, but as a consequence of choices made, choices that have been made in Gaza, in Doha, in Washington, and in Riyadh by Tel Aviv. So the first question to ask is quite a simple one, really. What does the pact actually say? Let's dig into that. What have the Saudis and Pakistan cooked up between them? On the 17th of September in Riyadh, in the presence of Mohammed bin Salman and Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, the two governments signed what they called the Strategic Mutual Defence Agreement. The text pledged that any aggression against one would be treated as aggression against the other, nice and simple. It promised joint deterrence, deepened defence cooperation, and a shared front against external threats. Saudi outlets hailed this as historic, and it is, quite frankly. International observers noted the gravity of this. What struck most analysts was not the boilerplate about friendship, though, but the explicit language of mutual defence, which is rarely used outside of NATO type of treaties. But what raised eyebrows even further was the nuclear shadow that is cast across all of this. Pakistan's defence minister said bluntly that his country's nuclear programme could be made available to Saudi Arabia under this pact. He did not spell out exactly what that meant, and perhaps that was the point. The ambiguity itself is the deterrent. What ifs and maybes have always been this language surrounding the possession of nukes and the idea of hanging on to them, as much as so many of us might disagree with that. Saudi Arabia, long suspected of financing parts of Pakistan's nuclear development back in the 70s and 80s, now had in writing a defense treaty with the only Muslim nuclear power. Israel has always relied on its unspoken nuclear monopoly, never admitted to having one, but widely understood to have one. And that was the cornerstone of their strategic dominance in the region. But now, for the first time, another state in that region has a credible claim to nuclear deterrence through a new alliance, even if no warhead ever crosses the Arabian Sea. For Tel Aviv's planners, that uncertainty is absolute poison. So the second question that follows from that is why Pakistan and why now? Saudi Arabia could, in theory, have deepened ties with the United States, could they not? Renewed their military guarantees with France or leaned more heavily on Egypt. Instead, they chose Pakistan. But that choice makes perfect sense if you consider a little bit of history. Legitimacy and leverage play a part in this too. Since the 1980s, Pakistani troops have been stationed on Saudi soil, providing a quiet but steady backstop for the kingdom's security. Pakistani pilots have flown Saudi aircraft. Pakistani officers have trained Saudi soldiers. And Pakistani defense academies have educated Saudi cadets. The financial flows have always gone the other way. Riyadh bailing out Islamabad in moments of crisis, providing cheap oil and direct cash support. So the relationship is not a new one. It's already embedded. Pakistan also provides what no Western ally can, religious legitimacy. For Mohammed bin Salman, to tie Saudi Arabia's fate further to Washington or Tel Aviv is to invite accusations of betrayal from certain quarters. His claim to domestic and regional leadership depends in part on his guardianship of holy sites like Mecca and Medina. To embrace Israel at a time of genocide in Gaza would be a political catastrophe, therefore. To tie Saudi defense to Pakistan, by contrast, though, is to reinforce those Islamic credentials of his. In the eyes of the Muslim world, this is not dependency on the West, it is partnership with a brother state. And then there's the leverage side of it. Saudi Arabia does not want to build its own nuclear program. The costs, the sanctions, the international outrage would be prohibitive, as you can imagine. But by binding itself to Pakistan, Riyadh gains the benefits of nuclear ambiguity without the risks of proliferation. It can hint credibly that in a crisis, it would have nuclear protection now. And that hint alone changes the calculus for its adversaries. They might have just killed off Netanyahu and the hard ride of his coalition's dreams of greater Israel as we know it. The third question is whether this pact is aimed at Iran or Yemen in parts too, as some might well question this, given Saudi Arabia's recent historic issues with those nations. And on the surface, it's a perfectly reasonable argument to make. After all, Iran has been Saudi Arabia's greatest rival for a long time, and the Houthis have rained drones and missiles on Saudi oil infrastructure in the recent past. Yet the evidence actually no longer backs that up. Since March of 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran have been engaged in something of a diplomatic thaw, which has all been brokered by China. The reopening of embassies was followed by direct meetings, and that has included Mohammed bin Salman hosting senior Iranian figures such as Ali Larijani in Jeddah at the same time this pact was being signed and negotiated with Pakistan. Talks involved in deepening ties between the Saudis and Iran happening almost alongside this pact with Pakistan. That's not the behavior of a state preparing for war with Tehran, is it? The Houthis, meanwhile, are in the middle of a truce that has been holding since 2023. They are not striking Aramco plants or airports in Saudi Arabia now. They're targeting Israeli airports and Red Sea shipping instead. So for Saudi Arabia, the threat from Yemen has been placed on ice. It's not immediate, so it didn't necessitate this pact at this point in itself. So if not Iran or Yemen, then the answer can only be Israel itself, and in part the United States too. Saudi Arabia has watched Israel grow increasingly reckless. It has watched Washington prove increasingly unreliable, and therefore it's chosen to ensure itself with someone else. The unreliability of the United States is not new either, though. It was exposed back in 2019 when those Houthi drones struck the Abqaiq facility and knocked out half of Saudi oil production. Donald Trump hesitated. He threatened sanctions. He didn't commit to it in the end, though. Didn't commit to retaliation. He certainly tried retaliating against the Houthis for Israel, though, didn't he? For Riyadh, that was the moment the scales fell from the eyes, though. The decades-old assumption that American power was the ultimate guarantor of Saudi security collapsed in the smoke that was rising over Abqaiq. Since then, the doubts have only deepened. Biden's administration was ambivalent, torn between arms sales and pressure over human rights. Washington's strategic gaze has shifted to Asia. Saudi Arabia has been left to wonder whether in its moment of need, the United States would truly act for them. And then, of course, came Israel's strike on Doha on the 9th of September. Israeli jets bombed the Qatari capital, killing Hamas leaders engaged in ceasefire talks, so those they were trying to target largely survived. It was a violation of sovereignty, certainly, though, an act of aggression in a Gulf capital, and a blunder of staggering proportions. Qatar condemned it as terrorism. Arab and Islamic states gathered for an emergency summit. Draft resolutions warned it threatened normalization itself. Analysts called it a shock that forced the Gulf into a whole new reckoning. And for Mohammed bin Salman, it seems that was the end. To sign a normalization deal with Israel after such an act would be political suicide. And what made it even worse, what made it almost laughable in its grotesquerie, was the excuse. Israel claimed the strike on Doha was self-defense, that old chestnut again, as if bombing a Gulf capital during ceasefire talks was anything other than state terrorism. As if killing negotiators in a neutral city was a legitimate extension of military necessity. It was a defense so absurd it collapsed under its own weight. Instead of frightening the Gulf into compliance, it ridiculed Israel on the world stage. Netanyahu thought he could frame Doha as a battlefield. Instead, he detonated his own diplomacy. The strike on Doha did more than inflame opinion, it crystallized a fear. If Israel could bomb Qatar, it could one day bomb Saudi Arabia. The illusion of control that normalization would bring stability evaporated. Instead, Israel looked like a liability. At the very moment Netanyahu hoped to secure his greatest prize, he destroyed it with his own hands. All of this unfolded against the backdrop of Gaza. The dehumanization of Palestinians has allowed Israel to commit atrocities in plain sight. Palestinians are treated as less than human. Their suffering is acceptable collateral. It's a defense so outrageous it should be laughed out of every chancellery on earth. But instead, Western leaders nod along, bought and paid for as they are. From Mohammed bin Salman, whose claim to legitimacy rests on his role as custodian of Islam's holiest sites, to embrace Israel in this moment would have been calamitous. He might be ruthless, but he's not blind and he's not stupid. Instead, he chose Pakistan. And by doing so, he rebranded Saudi Arabia as a defender of the Muslim world rather than the collaborator with his oppressor. He gave himself cover, prestige, and insurance, and he gave Israel a problem it can't solve. For Israel, the consequences are therefore severe. Its three strategic pillars are in absolute ruins now. First, the perception of American backing is weakened. If Saudi Arabia is hedging with Pakistan, others may well follow. Second, the pursuit of Arab normalization has been detonated. Doha was the trigger. Israel pulled it. Riyadh's pact with Islamabad is the burial of the plan. And thirdly, Israel's nuclear monopoly is now under threat. Even the suggestion that Pakistan's arsenal might shield Saudi Arabia undermines Israel's most prized advantage. But the ripple effects flow even wider than that. For Iran, this pact is reassurance for them. Saudi Arabia is not joining Israel's camp. For the Houthis, it's confirmation that Riyadh seeks insurance, not escalation. For Turkey, it is a challenge. Saudi Arabia, not Ankara, is positioning itself as leader of the Muslim world. Erdogan won't like that very much. His ego won't take it. For India, it's a massive headache, and a deserved one, actually. Any strengthening of Pakistan alarms Delhi and may push it closer to Tel Aviv, Modi already having signed a major multi-billion-pound agreement with Israel to his absolute shame. And for China, it's an opportunity. Beijing has ties to both Riyadh and Islamabad, and also to Tehran these days too. So they gain leverage in West Asia from all of this convergence. So can it be argued that Saudi Arabia has turned on Israel? Not formally. Riyadh is a fence sitter, isn't it? They've not declared Tel Aviv an enemy and are unlikely to in any kind of vociferous way unless Israel attack them. But in practice, yes, it has walked away from normalization. It's tied itself to a Muslim nuclear power now to protect itself from that state that it was going to normalize ties with, potentially. It's raised the specter of nuclear ambiguity to protect itself now. It has positioned itself in opposition to Israel's narrative. It's done so without ever naming Israel, too. But the effect's the same, because who else could it possibly be? And here lies the tease. The dangling thread Israel cannot ignore. What happens next time? What happens the next time Israel bombs a neighbor's capital under the guise of self-defense? What happens the next time they pull a Doha? What happens the next time Tel Aviv decides it can act with impunity and Riyadh decides enough is enough? Will Pakistan's shadow remain a rumor, or will it force Israel to think twice before pulling the trigger again? Israel wanted Saudi Arabia as the jewel of the Abraham Accords. He said it drove Riyadh into the arms of Islamabad. That's not just bad news for Tel Aviv, it's absolute humiliation for them. It's the moment the pretense collapsed and the dream warped under the weight of their own arrogance. And the unanswered question, the one that hangs over every Israeli war room right now, is whether the next reckless strike will not just backfire diplomatically, but summon a deterrent Israel has never had to face before. It's not just Saudi Arabia that's found common cause with Iran lately, though. The events of Doha have also led to common ground being found elsewhere where it comes to Israel, between Iran and Egypt at that. Egypt, who keep the gates of Rafah shut and provide cover for Israel, have also been pushed too far, it seems. So get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't.
Kofi, follow me.